Okay. Yeah. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is Summer Schmaling. I'm a member of the Halifax School Committee. I'd like everybody to know that this meeting is being recorded and will be played on cable this week on Channel 9. This is a forum on Common Core to let people become educated about what's happening in our children's classrooms. Speaking tonight will be Jamie Gass of the Pioneer Institute, Bob Johnson, who's also a member of the Halifax School Committee, and Kevin Lynham of the Whitman Hanson School Committee. So a little bit about myself. I'm a mother of two. My daughter's in 4th grade, my son's in kindergarten. I'm very involved in my children's education, therefore I ran for school committee in Halifax and was elected in May. I am a research tech in a laboratory at Tufts Medical School in Boston. So my education is clearly important to me and got me where I am today. So Common Core is a very big issue that spans a lot of arenas, ranging from the content to the financial consequences and privacy rights of our children.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go, behind you.
Sorry, I have it right here. I didn't even know it.
Come on.
Oh wait, someone wants football, that's fine.
You got it.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't have the right remote. Sorry about that.
Back to important things.
Open up your cells, everything.
Anyway, so for me, I became interested in what was happening in my child's classroom when my 4th grader, who was then a 3rd grader, was chosen to participate in the PARCC pilot program. So I began asking questions of my local school administrators. And when I went and met with her principal and vice principal, they really had no idea where I was coming from and couldn't tell me a lot about PARCC to begin with. And they told me that I would not have access to the content of the test that she was taking, nor would I have access to the results of the test itself. And when I realized that my daughter would be taking PARCC in addition to MCAS that year, I decided that was not a good choice for my child to be spending several days in testing when she should be learning in the classroom. And I realized I had to be involved in what was going on. There's no academic benefit to my child participating in this PARCC pilot program, therefore she did not participate in it. I refused to have her partake in it. So I held a forum in my hometown of Halifax to educate other parents and school committee members about what was taking place in the classroom. I made exhausted efforts to reach out to the members of the Department of Education and Chairman Mitchell Chester, and they never responded, not even to respectfully decline. And I found it a bit disturbing that these people have such a large control over my child's day, yet make no effort to engage parents when we are interested in learning more about what is going on with their child's education. I'm very unsatisfied and extremely disturbed about what I see in the content of my child's coursework and the recent stress it has brought to teachers with the increase in standardized testing and the surging financial burden that the schools have been left with, and these changes are being inflicted on local taxpayers. As a former member of my town's finance committee, I've had the opportunity to see the management of local finances both through the lens of the town and as a taxpayer. Local aid to cities and towns has decreased since 2008, making less money available to municipalities to assist in rising educational costs. Race to the top monies granted by the federal government to install assessments aligned with Common Core, known as PARCC here in Massachusetts, will not cover the full cost of transitioning to Common Core standards or implementing PARCC. On a side note, if Massachusetts standards have been noted by both Bill Gates and President Obama as being the best in the country because we have a state that has had the highest and most remarkable academic achievements, why wasn't Race to the Top not dubbed Race to be Massachusetts? It would have been free to adopt these standards and there's no copyright on it and there'd be no federal funds necessary to implement it. Switching to the Common Core standards has resulted in curriculum changes involving new textbooks, materials, and technologies. Some of these changes to the curriculum require one-on-one technology initiatives in the classroom, requiring updated equipment and an increase for technical support. The money for these needs will fall on the backs of taxpayers. PARCC is an unfunded mandate. There has been no cost analysis by PARCC done by the legislature. If your local district decides to administer PARCC online rather than by paper, these technology updates will be absolutely essential. But the question begs, why are we wasting tax dollars paying to train teachers to administer PARCC when we already have vetted MCAS, spent millions of taxpayer dollars on Massachusetts educational frameworks? We rank nationally in education. Why are we throwing this investment away? With state aid decreasing and the cost of education continually rising, the implementation of Common Core will be devastating to families, communities, and taxpayers whom are already struggling. Cities and towns may face challenges such as choosing between funding an ever-increasing school budget to meet mandated changes or funding the needs of other local departments such as police, fire, and highway. Recently, in my own hometown of Halifax, our last town meeting voted to fund the school budget under the requested amount by the school committee. This trend is not only indicative of the financial hardships families are facing, but I can't help but ask, what if the money for the rapidly increasing school budget simply was not available? As a school committee member, I have recently become more aware and concerned with the loss of local control regarding education. Federal statute, written upon the establishment of the U.S. Department of Education, proclaims there shall not be an increase in authority in the federal government over education. Isn't this precisely what Common Core is attempting to do by implementing federal standards? Common Core is not a true state-led initiative. It will and already has resulted in the narrowing of the curriculum and loss of state and local control over standards. State tests such as MCAS were reviewed by local teachers, consultants, and independent sources before and after the tests were given. Under Common Core, the tests are developed by private organizations and out of public view. There is also no public release of most or all of the test content. The time spent on the test is also a major concern that I have, and frankly, every parent and teacher should find this alarming. Currently under MCAS, our children undergo 4 testing sessions, 2 in reading scheduled in March, 2 in math scheduled in May, consuming roughly 8 hours of our children's classroom time. With PARCC, our children will undergo 9 sessions of testing, 3 in ELA and 2 in math, all scheduled in March. And at the end of the year, 2 in ELA and 2 math sessions, both scheduled in May. This totals approximately 18 hours of testing out of our classroom time. Another issue I have with Common Core standards and PARCC assessment is the focus on math and English with disregard for other programs such as science, art, history, and physical education. A well-rounded education should take all of these areas into consideration, and none should take a backseat to another in order to emphasize subjects in which our children are being tested. There are no science standards, or the science standards were not written when Massachusetts adopted the Common Core frameworks. The next generation science standards are aligned with Common Core and are still in the draft phase. Living in Massachusetts, where we are the hub of science, math, and engineering, and being a scientist myself, I find it disturbing that we as a state would adopt education standards that do not include the sciences. Another issue for me regarding Common Core is the data and privacy issue. As a parent, I have become increasingly troubled with the amount of data collected on our children from the time they enter preschool until the moment they finalize their education adventure. This data grab is not limited to strictly academic information. It includes such information as behavioral and disciplinary data, socioeconomic data, and your child's emotions while performing school or homework. Emotions, how and why is this information relevant? Amendments to the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or better known as FERPA, in 2008 and 2011 changed the language requiring parental notification before sharing a student's personally identifiable data to that of best practice to inform parents before releasing such information. Best practice. So I, as a parent, am to hope or assume that administrators and educators in my child's school district are operating under the hand of the federal government with utmost integrity. Another major change that brought about by FERPA includes the disclosure of personal information to third parties. A third party is defined as anyone whom the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed deems so, including private companies, volunteers, and consultants. Is there any consideration for a child's lifelong right to privacy? As a concerned parent, I believe every parent should ask, shouldn't the parent be given clear and concise information on what data is being collected on our children? Shouldn't we have the final say on who has access to our child's personal information? Or simply ask, is there a need to collect all this personal and private information on our children beyond an anonymous assessment score? Common Core's stated goal is to prepare students for jobs or junior college. Is anyone wondering why the same wealthy people who promoted Common Core are sending their children to private schools unaffected by this overhaul? Who with a mediocre Common Core education will become the engineers, scientists, and doctors of the future? None but the children of the wealthy. So that's what I have to say about this whole thing. I know that was very broad and a little bit of an overview of every little piece that Common Core seems to cover. I'm sure Jamie will go into much further depth about many of these things. So at this time, I would like to introduce Jamie Gass. He is the Pioneer Institute's director of the Center for School Reform. At Pioneer, he has framed, commissioned, and managed over 60 research papers and numerous policy events on K-12 education reform topics. Jamie has more than 2 decades of experience in public administration and education reform at the state, municipal, and school district levels. Previously, he has worked in the Massachusetts Office of Education Quality and Accountability as a senior policy analyst, technical writer, and in the state budget office under 2 Massachusetts governors. In the 1990s, Jamie worked for the dean of the Boston University School of Education Boston University Management Team and its historic partnership with the Chelsea Public Schools. He has appeared on various Boston media outlets, WBZ's Nightside with Dan Ray, RKO's Tom and Todd Show, WBZ's Keller at Large, WGBH's Kaylee Crosley Show, WBUR, as well as the talk radio shows across the country. He has been quoted in The Economist, Education Week, and the Boston Globe, and his op-eds are regularly published in the Boston Herald, Worcester Telegram and Gazette, and the Lowell Sun, the Providence Journal, and other regional newspapers, as well as national op-eds and magazine articles in the Wall Street Journal, Education Next, and City Journal. Jamie speaks on academic standards, school choice options, and school accountability at events throughout the country. So if you join me in welcoming Jamie.
So thanks so much, Summer, and I want to thank Michael for setting up this event this evening, and all of you for taking the time on a Saturday evening to come out and listen to it. I hope it's something that you'll find interesting. I think it's enormously important and relevant not only to the lives of our children or our grandchildren, but also every citizen, I think, should be concerned about some of the things that Summer already shared, and then I'll talk about it in a little more detail. Happy to see Representative Deal here. He has been really remarkable on this topic. He has tracked it very carefully. He's attended numerous events that I've spoken at and others have spoken at. He's really been great, so I want to thank him for both being here, but his leadership on the topic. Before I start, I want to just tell you what Common Core is, because even though Massachusetts adopted Common Core in the summer of 2010, and over 40 states have now adopted it, the fact is whether it's in Massachusetts or whether it's in many states across the country, a lot of citizens, state legislators, public officials really don't know an awful lot about it, and citizens as well. So what Common Core is a set of English and math standards that were developed by the National Governors Association, which is a Washington, D.C. based trade group that represents not states, but the governors of each state, as well as the Council of Chief State School Officers, which is the Commissioner of Education from each state's lobby group in Washington, D.C. The lion's share of the funding for the development of Common Core was from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You all know who Bill Gates is. He was the founder of Microsoft. And then it's coupled with these national standards in English math are coupled with federally funded tests. Massachusetts participates in the PARCC testing, which will replace MCAS in another year or so if something isn't done. But New Hampshire and Maine and others are in the Smarter Balance Testing Consortia. The federal government has spent about $350 million funding these 2 private testing consortia. And among the numerous issues that I think are sort of troublesome about Common Core is that all of the players around it, whether it's the PARCC testing consortia or the Smarter Balance testing consortia, or whether it's Achieve Inc. or the Council of Chief State School Officers or the Governors Association, is that these are all private organizations. They are not accountable to the public in any way, shape, or form. So if anyone in this audience wanted to do a basic Freedom of Information Act search about the decision-making around Common Core, why the authors that wrote the Common Core were selected, how much they were paid. None of that is available to the general public. So that gives you sort of the ground rules, or gives you the baseline of what it is that Common Core is about. But I'm going to begin my remarks by giving you a little bit of context, and in order to do that, I'm going to start with someone who knew a great deal more about the founding intent and the governance of this country than certainly I do, and probably anyone else alive. And that's James Madison, who is considered the father of the Constitution. He is the drafter of the Bill of Rights. He wrote a good number of the Federalist Papers, which were the advocacy journalism and essays on behalf of the adoption of the Constitution. He wrote this in 1792. If Congress may establish teachers in every state, county, and parish, and pay them out of the public treasury, they may take into their hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. I would venture to declare it as my opinion, it would subvert the very foundation and transmute the very nature of limited government established by the people of America. So I think the Founding Fathers were incredibly wise and farsighted. They understood under our Constitution that the national government can do many things, usually related to defense and trade and foreign policy, but that most of the issues that most intimately connect the lives of citizens, particularly the lives of children, are best handled at the state and local level. That arrangement of the national government doing certain things and the state and local governments doing certain things is called federalism. That's what the founders understood. And that was really the governing philosophy behind this country. It is the way in which limited government, it's the way in which liberty, and it's the way in which the public trust is upheld under our rule of law. And I would argue that actually that arrangement, this federalism, has served this country quite well. Over the last 200 years or so, we've essentially gone from a loose collection of colonies along the eastern seaboard to the most powerful country in the world. It's no small accomplishment. And the whole foundation of what our republic was founded on was this idea that citizens at the local level, and particularly people that are governing schools, this would serve as the wellspring of our democracy. Unlike most of the rest of the world, in particular Europe, where ministers and kings and queens and czars and monarchs kind of make all the decisions, what was really unique and what is unique about this country is that the ideas for our governance comes from the citizens. It comes from the bottom up. It actually doesn't come from the top down. And no, there isn't any better expression of that than public schooling. But in spite of that success, this historic success of the country, the fact is that gradually after World War II, the country was beginning to decline in our K-12 education performance. The first example of it was during the space race in Sputnik, when the Soviet Union put the Sputnik in orbit, and everyone became alarmed that we were losing our edge in the area of math and science in particular. But more dramatically, by 1983, there was a report that was done by the Reagan administration called A Nation at Risk. And people on the left and people on the right, and Republicans and Democrats, all agreed that this Nation at Risk report was a real fire bell in the night. What it highlighted and demonstrated was that we had fallen from among the highest performing countries in the world in K-12 education to about 11th or 17th in terms of our performance. But what that report did not do was come up with lots of top-down prescriptions from Washington, D.C. on how to solve these problems. Because everybody across the political spectrum in the K-12 education policy world had always understood that K-12 education is the proper legal jurisdiction of the states and localities. Even after the federal government gradually growing in its role in K-12 education, today only about 10% of the funding of K-12 education comes from the feds. Most of it comes from the local government, and in a state like Massachusetts, the balance is, is a little more. It's a little more of a balance between the state and local government. So, in order to address these problems, and this Nation at Risk report basically said that if we had the system of public education that we have imposed on us, it would be an act of war. It was really an alarming document and declaration. And so immediately states and policy people began to kind of swing into action about how to solve these problems. Some people advocated for expanding school choice through private and parochial schools and charter schools and voc tech schools and what have you, and that the competition would help stimulate more choices for parents, and and the competition would prompt or drive the public system to improve itself. And then other people began to come up really in the 80s of the idea of a set of national standards, testing, and curriculum in order to have a sort of one-size-fits-all for Washington, D.C. But what Massachusetts did in 1993 was really different from both of those options. And I want to tell you a little bit about it because it helps give you the context of how we got to this conversation about Common Core. So in 1993, Republican Bill Weld and Tom Birmingham, who's a pretty liberal Democrat, he's from Chelsea, great relationship with organized labor. Mark Roosevelt, pretty liberal Democrat from Beacon Hill, also a great relationship with organized labor. They got together, and I only mention their partisan affiliations to show that it was a bipartisan compromise that occurred in 1993. And what they did is they decided to craft the landmark 1993 Massachusetts Education Reform Act, and decided to put about, we've spent over $100 billion at the state and local level since 1993 in exchange for all of the difficult things that had led to the sort of stagnation and decline that was occurring in the Commonwealth, but also across the country. Specifically, they were going to redirect the conversation on academic standards back from fuzzy math and soft skills and self-esteem and all the things that had sort of led to this decline. They were going to ground it back into what Summer was talking about, which is the basics of English, math, science, and history. Specifically in the area of English, we were going to be redirecting the curriculum and what kids are taught back to classic literature, poetry, and drama. So it's things like Huckleberry Finn, it's Sherlock Holmes, Charles Dickens, high quality poetry and drama. Because it turns out that the quality of the vocabulary and the sentences and the readings and those kinds of texts are just better than the kind of nonfiction or what they call informational texts that have been kind of populating K-12 education. In the area of mathematics, Massachusetts was going to emulate California and South Korea and Hong Kong and Singapore and Japan and other high-performing, largely East Asian countries that had access to Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. What was becoming clearer and clearer even in the 90s is that Algebra 1 is the gateway for all higher level mathematics, so if you want your child to go into the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, they have to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade so that they can get to the point where they can take some pre-calculus, calculus, or trigonometry by the time they get out of high school, because those are the kind of courses that they're going to need in order to take engineering, etc. in college. And so in these two key areas of English and mathematics, the Commonwealth really went in a different direction. And then we coupled some teacher testing on academic content, so the students and the teachers were going to be tested on the same academic materials. The expectations for everybody in the system, from the students to the teachers, was going to be essentially the same or similar. And then there was a system of sort of accountability for everybody in the system. That was really the grand bargain. It was the money in exchange for high standards and accountability throughout the entire system, which was probably most manifest in the development of the MCAS test. So there's really two conversations going on in this country right now as a consequence of the work that was done in the last 20 years in Massachusetts. There's everything that Massachusetts has done, and then there's the rest of the country, which is still stuck in various degrees of stagnation and decline. The same kind of stagnation and decline that was outlined in that Nation at Risk report in 1983. And so Summer is accurate. They should have, in 2009, when the Obama administration developed this Race to the Top, which is a federal grant program, about $4.3 billion that they were dangled in front of the states in order to adopt policy objectives that the U.S. Department of Education outlined. They really should have called it the Race to be Massachusetts. And they always had to have Massachusetts adopt Common Core. They needed to have us adopt Common Core, because if Massachusetts adopted, then what could Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana, the really low performing state, they couldn't, resist. And of course, the reason why Massachusetts had to adopt was that really exceeding the expectations of the architects of that ed reform in 1993, the results have been historic. So there's a test called the NAEP test. It's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's a test that's been around for 35 or 40 years. And it's tested, they do it every couple of years. So no state in the history of that test has ever been #1 in every category tested at every grade tested. And in 2005, Massachusetts did that. And then we did it again in 2007, in 2009, 2011, and 2013. It's really like winning the World Series 5 times in a row and doing it in 4 straight games each time. It is a remarkable, historic accomplishment. And the teachers and the principals and the parents and the taxpayers and the superintendents and the school committee, all the folks in this Commonwealth should be enormously proud of this accomplishment. It is historic. But as that Nation at Risk report said, you have to compete with the Hong Kongs and the Singapores and the Japans, all the high-performing countries in order to compete in the 21st century. So in 2007, Massachusetts tested as its own individual country. It was one of only 2 states in the Union to test as its own country on a test called the TIMSS test, which is the gold standard of international math and science testing. So we are as it turns out, our 8th graders were tied for #1 in the world in science, and our 4th and 8th graders were within the top 3 or 4 in the world in terms of mathematics performance. If doing as well as we've done on the NAEP testing is winning the World Series, this is like winning Olympic gold medals. And we did that in 2007, and then we did it again in 2013. Again, the architects of ed reform, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives, this exceeded the wildest expectations of what anyone thought was going to be possible under ed reform. So in 2009, 2010, when the Obama administration began to push this race to the top, Pioneer Institute, where I work, which is an independent, nonpartisan think tank, we are really known for doing, I think, fairly high-quality, data-driven research. We don't take any government money. There's no deep-pocketed foundation is paid for us to do the work that we've done on Common Core. We thought that given Massachusetts had so much to lose in this discussion around Common Core, that someone ought to take a look at the quality, the academic quality of Common Core, and compare it to the high-standard states like Massachusetts and California and Minnesota and Texas and Minnesota, et cetera. And what we did is we enlisted a woman named Sandra Stotsky, who had worked on the standards in Massachusetts and in Indiana and a bunch of other states. Even the people that are pro-Common Core acknowledge that Sandy Stotsky is the only person in the country whose standards, the Massachusetts standards, have correlated with historic gains on every measure known to K-12 education. In fact, the advocates of Common Core used to use Sandy as the person who did the analysis for them on the quality of English standards all across the country. And we coupled her with a guy named Jim Milgram, who's a professor of mathematics at Stanford University. He worked on the very high quality California math standards, but he is in his own right is an internationally renowned mathematician. What's unique about Professor Milgram is that very few mathematicians are actually interested in what's taught in K-12 education. Most of their research and most of what the time that they spend is on their own research, which is very high level of mathematics. And then the third person we had work on is a guy named Zev Worman, who is a Silicon Valley engineer. He too worked on the California math standards. So we got the best people, the best researchers we could to give us an independent appraisal of what Common Core was all about in English and mathematics against high standard states. And they did 4 crosswalks at every step of the way. There were 4 drafts of Common Core that came out really in about 6 months. So it took years for Massachusetts to develop our standards. Common Core really was developed in about 6 or 8 months. And what we had these researchers do is take a look at the quality. And what they found is that Common Core at every step of the way in both English and math was of significantly lower academic quality than what high standard states like Massachusetts already had. So it was not going to be a race to the top. It was going to be a race to the middle. Specifically, they ignored all of the evidence from Massachusetts in the reading side. So we're #1 in the country in reading. And they ignored the evidence that the way to have kids succeed in reading is through classic literature, poetry, and drama. They decided under Common Core to cut that. Under Massachusetts standards that we have now, that have replaced the previous standards, it cuts it by classic literature, poetry, and drama by about 60%. It's a pretty remarkable cut. But they also ignored the evidence on the mathematics side too. So, and not just from Massachusetts or California, but from the international competitors. So under Common Core, according to the research that we have done, students will have access to Algebra 1, not in 8th grade the way we previously did, but they'll have it in 9th or early 10th grade. So that Professor Milgram, he essentially has said, even by about 6th or 7th grade, the under Common Core, students in the United States will be a couple years behind their international competitors. Common Core uses an experimental form of geometry that has never been successful in any place it's been tried, and it really stops at what Professor Milgram calls Algebra 2 light. The problem is that if your child wants to study the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, Common Core is really a path to nowhere, because kids have to have pre-calculus, calculus, trigonometry in order to be prepared to do college level work in mathematics. Jason Zimba is the person, he's the author of the Common Core Math Standard. He has made it clear that in his own words, that Common Core, if your child wants to study the STEM fields, you're going to have something added onto it. So that's right from the author himself. So the next piece of research we looked at, because as I mentioned at the beginning, everybody across the political spectrum has always known that there are actually limits on the federal government and the role that they can play in K-12 education. It's not just that they only pay for about 10% of it, but going back 50 years or more, there are actually laws that prohibit the federal government from entering into K-12 education in these areas around standards and testing and curriculum. So we enlisted the former general counsel and deputy general counsel of the U.S. Department of Education under the second Bush administration. These are the two highest ranking lawyers in the federal government under the previous administration. And what these two lawyers found and mapped out in very lawyerly, dispassionate detail is that there are 3 federal laws that explicitly prohibits the federal government from funding, directing, validating, endorsing national standards, testing, and curriculum. And those 3 federal laws are the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was signed into law by Lyndon Johnson. There's the General Education Provision Act of 1970, which was signed into law by Richard Nixon. And then the enabling legislation that set up the U.S. Department of Education itself, which was signed into law in 1979 by Jimmy Carter, all make it clear that the kinds of things that the U.S. Department of Education is doing in terms of getting states to sign on to Common Core using federal grant money, directly funding the PARCC testing consortia, in which Massachusetts is a part of, funding the Smarter Balance testing consortia, all of this is forbidden under federal law, right? Now, sometimes the critics of ours, that is to say, the people that are in favor of Common Core, say, "Oh, this is it's a conservative position or it's a Tea Party position." But the reality of it is that 2 of the 3 presidents that signed these federal laws were Democrats. So it's hardly a partisan issue, really. It's a matter of the law. So the next piece of research that we looked at was the cost, because even though, again, 40 some odd states have adopted, and the Gates Foundation, with its generosity, has spent over $200 million funding and advocating and developing Common Core, the fact is that a vast majority of the state legislatures, a vast majority of the boards of eds, the governor's offices all across the country, including here in Massachusetts, never did a cost-benefit analysis of what it's going to cost the states and localities to align their textbooks, their technology, their teacher professional development with Common Core. So we enlisted a guy who had actually worked for both Republicans and Democrats. He had worked for, in the second administration of President Clinton in the U.S. Department of Education, and he worked in the first administration of, or the only administration of George H.W. Bush. So he had worked for both Republicans and Democrats, and had a lot of experience with testing at the state level too. And his name's Ted Barber. He and his team, they came up with a figure, a ballpark figure. I think it's actually a low ball to conservative estimate. He was not trying to run up some astronomical number to blow people away, but he was trying to come up with a baseline projection of what it would cost the states and localities to align their materials and with Common Core. And the figure that he came up with was $16 billion. For Massachusetts, we have already spent, again, over $100 billion, and that's billion with a B, to become #1 in the country and to be internationally competitive in math and science and to have the best standards in the country. It's going to cost us an additional $350 million to align all of our work with Common Core. What's becoming clearer and clearer is that there were no hearings on Common Core in the legislature. There was no cost projections. There were no bills. There was none of the features of what we all know is sort of the basic elements of a representative democracy. That was the main way in which this was done. And not surprisingly, no one asked what it was going to cost, right? So we now know a ballpark what the cost is. What we're seeing, and we're seeing it in just recently in the last several months in New York, the governor of New York has asked for an additional $1 billion. It was on the ballot in New York this fall. He's asked for an additional $1 billion, and that's just on the technology costs for the PARCC testing. The same is true in California. They asked for just 1 year. They asked for an additional $3 billion to implement the Smarter Balance testing consortia and the technology adaptations going with it. So I think what we're seeing is, and we have another cost analysis that we're doing as an update on it, is we're actually seeing that our figure was a low ball or a mid-range, a very conservative estimate. It was not an astronomical figure. Other folks are going to talk a little bit about the data collection. We did do a paper on the student data collection. Summer talked a little bit about too. The name of our paper is called Cogs in the Machine. It's a 80-page paper. It's got about 400 or 500 footnotes. It was written by two lawyers. One of them went to Harvard Law School. Very credible folks, and they map out really what it runs parallel to Common Core. It's not in the Common Core standards itself, but to really have a better understanding of what Common Core is about is to understand that the advocates for it really don't see K-12 education as a mechanism for perpetuating our democracy through citizenship. They really see it more as a workforce development system. And so on top of gathering academic data from things like the PARCC testing, they also want to have a lot of personally identifiable socioeconomic data and other data. They want 400 data points so that essentially bureaucrats at different levels can start directing kids to certain careers. And there's a lot of problems with that, not the least of which is that there are actually federal laws. Summer talked about these FERPA laws. These are basically parental and family privacy rights, laws that prohibit the federal government from gathering data on children and their families. And the U.S. Department of Education has brushed a lot of those sides aside as well. In fact, what they did through the Race to the Top, again, this grant program, is they created incentives, federal incentives, to have states gather the data. And then both the testing consortia, the PARCC testing consortia, and the Massachusetts Department of Education, then through this arrangement, will turn the data over to the feds. So they've basically incentivized other people to do the things that they can't do by law. But they have also brushed over the side their laws that prohibit them. The good news on all this is that as state legislators and parents and moms, I have to say, we've spoken in front of audiences of 5 people or 900 people. 70–80% of the audience are usually moms. And I'm not saying that as a father of 2 daughters, but the fact is that the more the moms have found out about it, the more irritated they've become. That's a polite way of saying what we're seeing across the country. Texas from the beginning did not adopt. They were Texas and they said, don't mess with us, right? That's sort of their state motto. We wish Massachusetts had that same motto, because the fact is that some of the states that either didn't adopt from the beginning or that are working on repealing it or have pulled out had a lot less to lose than we did. States like Oklahoma, I mean, it's basically an average performing state. They had pretty okay standards. They had standards that were better than Common Core, but not, nearly in the same category as being, #1 in the country or internationally competitive. And parents and moms in particular are getting very, very well organized. They're doing it via Twitter and Facebook and all these other mechanisms, but they really are they've gotten themselves very well educated. In a lot of instances, they know a lot of the backstory even better than I do, and I've spent the last 5 years researching it. But the thing that's interesting is that right here in Massachusetts, so Mitch Chester is the Commissioner of Education, and in forum after forum, Summer and others have put together 30 or 40 forums, even in the last 9 months, all over the state, almost to an event you can never get from someone from the State Department of Education or someone from the local superintendent's office to show up and debate it. They will not do that. This is something we've seen over and over, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country. But Mitch Chester is actually the head of the PARCC testing consortia. So there's a variety of conflicts of interest around someone who is heading up the testing consortia, and his state has not formally adopted the PARCC test yet. And what we're seeing is this is a transition year where the districts have the choice of picking PARCC or staying with MCAS. And it's basically split 50-50. It's really remarkable. Here's the Commissioner of Education is the head of this, and half the communities have said they don't want to do it. And the PARCC testing consortia itself, it started off with about 25 states in it, and it's down to 8 or 9. And so the PARCC is in serious trouble. There's a lot of other information. I've already given you a ton of information. There's a lot of information I could go into about it. And I appreciate your interest in the topic. I guess I have sort of 2 pieces of advice, sort of parting pieces of advice. The first thing is that irrespective of political party, I would encourage you to engage on this topic and engage your state legislators, state senators, the governor-elect, the Board of Education, the commissioner, school committee. There's an enormous amount at stake here, and this is not done in Massachusetts. Other states have pulled out. Other states have pulled out of the testing consortia. We can win this. We can pull out of the PARCC. It can happen. The governor-elect can pull us out of this testing consortia, but he has got to hear that from people, and he's got to hear it with real regularity and real force. And then the final piece is sort of a more personal piece of advice, is that, as I said, I'm a father of 2 daughters. One is in 7th grade in Newton, and hasn't had a ton of interaction with the Common Core. She I guess it was the spring of her, in 1st grade, she came home to me one day and said, "Daddy, what is a Common Core math journal?" Well, it turns out what they want her to do is to write about math rather than actually doing real equations. And what my wife and I have done to kind of remedy that, and we don't accept any money from Kumon, but we, a year or so ago, enlisted our daughter in Kumon, which is basically math. They call it Japanese math, and there's kind of repetition to it, but it's just basic mathematics. And my own personal experience is that that's helped her a lot. She really enjoys math and has gotten good at it. But just even the last week, my wife and I got a letter from the Newton Public Schools talking about how there's going to be this new math we're going to be looking at. And it's nothing like the math that you've ever had before, but this is the direction we're going via the Common Core. So that's on the mathematics side. And then on the English side, what I'd encourage you to do, and it's the way in which my wife and I have remedied it, is, again, we don't get any money for it, but there's a thing called Classic Starts. You can go to Barnes & Noble, and for $5 you can get Huckleberry Finn, 100 pages. It's an a abridged, adopted version for kids. And guess what? They love it. And the quality of the classic literature and poetry and drama, it matters enormously in kids' lives. It helps them to understand what it is to be human and understand friendship and compassion and all the things that kind of bind us together as human beings. It helps develop the kind of people you want to have as your neighbors and people that you want to have as your policy makers and decision makers. So that's my 2 pieces of advice. I really appreciate your interest. I appreciate the folks that have set up this forum. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie. Our next speaker is Robert Johnson. He's a member of the Halifax School Committee. He has a bachelor's degree in law enforcement with a minor in U.S. history. He's a retired police lieutenant, watch commander from the Whitman Police Department with 25 years of service. His education has included courses in general, child, adolescent, and abnormal psychology. And Bob's interest in education comes from his desire for our children to become well-educated and successful Americans.
was half of my presentation. Well, if Jamie didn't ruin your evening, I'm going to try to finish it off. This is very distressing, what I have here. This is, I'm going to talk about data gathering and dissemination. And here goes. First, I begin with CMR 603 CMR 2307 from 1993. That's the beginning of the rights of students for privacy. And I'll just read some of the things. Access to third parties, except for the provision of 603 CMR 2307 4 A through J, no party shall have access to information in or from a student record without the specific informed consent of the eligible student or parents. That's pretty straightforward. And then these are the exceptions. A school may release for publication a student's name, class, participation in officially recognized activities in sports, degrees, honors, and awards, and post-high school plans. Well, there's no problem with that. That's what's in your yearbook. And B, upon receipt of a court order or lawfully issued subpoena. Nothing you can do about a subpoena, you hand it over. So far, so good. C, representatives of the Massachusetts Department of Education with permission from the Commissioner of Education and acting in accordance with guidelines that may be established by the Commissioner shall have access to student records as necessary in connection with the enforcement of federal and state education laws. That began to get me a little antsy. And then down below we have D. The Massachusetts Department of Education shall have access to student records for purposes of special education placements. No problem there. E. When considering an appeal of an evaluation team finding for a student pursuant to 766 Department of Education established under 766 shall have access to the right to copy the student record without the consent of the eligible student or parent. F, the school committee responsible for funding a day or residential placement under 766 may have access to the educational plan of the student. G, authorized school personnel of the school to which a student transfers shall have access to the student transfer card. That's always been the way as far as I know. H, school health personnel and local state health department personnel shall have access. The superintendent of schools and his or her designee shall provide to the Massachusetts Department of Education such anonymous statistical information derived from student records as the department may from time to time require. Not a big deal. The superintendent of schools or his or her designee may gather data from student records in order to provide anonymous statistical data or data to independent researchers analyzing programs and policies, provided that the identity of the student, individual student, cannot be determined from such data. That's not a problem. That just shows how large groups of kids are doing. K, a school shall release a student's name and address to authorized school personnel of a regional vocational school district if the city or town in which the school is located is a member of the regional vocational school district. Again, not really a problem. So that's the way it was in 1993. Now I'm going to skip over, and in the end I'll finish up with the current rules. But now I want to talk about the recent Department of Elementary and Secondary Education data disclosure. Under pressure from people like us, and perhaps from the Pioneer Institute, they made the following disclosure of what data they gather and what they can do with it. And here is their claim of their authority. What is our authority to collect and maintain student data? Most student data is initially collected from students and their parents and guardians by the public schools and districts that enroll and educate those students. These schools and districts are collectively referred to as local education authorities. That's your elementary schools and your middle schools and high schools. In turn, the DESE has authority under various state statutes to request and receive this data from the LEAs. Now, if I can stop here for a minute, my elementary school has told us that no data leaves the building. And I suspect it being less than truthful, which is an old cop term of telling someone they're a liar with a smile on their face. Because I think there's something wrong here. And you'll see why later. What student data do we collect? Well, they say we collect a wide range of individual student data. We collect information on school enrollment and attendance, demographics, test scores, courses, and grades, disciplinary action, and postgraduate plans, to name just a few categories. They didn't spill it all. Requests to collect additional data, elements from LEAs, from your local schools, go through a review process within the department to validate the need for the information and to weigh the benefits against the extra effort to gather the data. It doesn't say anything about privacy rights here. And I don't see really anything about privacy rights throughout this whole document. We do not collect students' social security numbers. Isn't that nice of them? Because it's illegal. Social security numbers are only supposed to be used for social security. So that was really nice of them. But they do allow schools to have your child's social security number. Don't give it to them. I would not give my school my child's social security number. How do we keep the data secure? I'll just skip through some of these. Student data is transferred from LEAs, the local schools, and the DESE, using secure encrypted file transfer protocols. Well, as we already know, the town of Halifax doesn't transfer any data to the state. And believe you me, I'm going to get to the bottom of this at some point in the near future. And because they told me that no data is transferred to the state or anywhere else. And now back to the DESE. What do we do with student data? The data is used to help gauge how well individual schools and districts are doing, to identify students who have met the competency determination required for high school graduation. This is a big one here. To determine funding under Chapter 70, Title I, and other state and federal school aid programs. Now, does that mean that the town of Halifax isn't going to get any Chapter 70 money because they don't hand over the data? That's what it seems to say here. Who do we share student data with? As noted earlier, under certain limited circumstances, DESE is permitted by law to redisclose personally identifiable student-level data to outside individuals or organizations. These include individuals or organizations who are assisting the DESE in carrying out its administrative responsibilities, conducting research or evaluation studies, or conducting audits and program compliance reviews. I'm going to read that again because I want you to remember it. As noted earlier, under certain limited circumstances, the DESE is permitted by law to redisclose personally identifiable student-level data to outside individuals or organizations. These include individuals or organizations who are assisting the DESE in carrying out its administrative responsibilities, conducting research or evaluation studies, or conducting audits and program compliance reviews. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, I don't know what will, because I don't like it one damn bit. Other public agencies, we occasionally share individual student data with other public agencies as we jointly carry out our statutory responsibilities. For example, we match our student records with records at the Department of Transitional Assistance to help identify students eligible for free school lunches. Now, on a little aside here, when my daughter enrolled at Massasoit last year, without asking for student aid, she was told she was not eligible for student aid because I made too much money. My daughter doesn't know how much money I make, and I would like to know how they know, because I didn't tell them. Nobody asked me how much I earn or how much my pension is, but somehow they knew it. And it's very uncomfortable for me to know that. Here's a good one here. I have it highlighted and circled in green. Researchers. We receive frequent requests from researchers for access to individual student data. High-quality research helps inform our policy and spending decisions. But each request, get this now, each request is closely reviewed to ensure that the data release is in the state's interest. Anything about the student or the parent's interest here? This is unbelievable. And I only got into this about 6 months ago. When I started on the school committee, I ran unopposed. I just didn't want the position to be unfilled. And I never realized what I was in for. But now I'm in it up to my neck, and there's no getting out now unless they kick me out. And there's talk of that. But that's another matter. Here's one here. The researcher must be free of any appearance of a conflict of interest with the study's outcome and cannot be an advocate with respect to the study topic. Well, I don't know if anybody mentioned this yet, but the chairman of the DESE, Mitchell Chester, is the chair of the park governing board. Somebody's going to get a big payday out of this. And I don't mind saying it on camera, because I'm really tired of this. And finally, before I get into the other stuff, a recent DESE initiative has been the development of the Edwin system. I don't even know what that is, which includes a secure portal for teachers, guidance counselors, principals, and other educators to see and analyze detailed information about their students and to help inform their classroom instruction. I guess so they can tailor it to the individual student. That's the theory, that's the claim. Edwin includes a growing suite of online curriculum materials and resources, helping teachers to target each student's individual needs. Edwin also includes the capability to move, and they put that in quotation, student records over the summer as students change schools and districts. This will allow teachers to become familiar with their incoming classes even before the first day of school. Well, Johnny, aren't you the guy that got thrown out of school for 3 weeks last year? So there's no walking in with a clean slate anymore. And then they say more information is available on the Edwin page of the DESE website. Go onto the DESE website and take a look at that Edwin page, because I just saw it for the first time today. I missed this when I was reviewing for this presentation. I'm sure there's a lot of interesting stuff in there that you'll want to take a look at. Now here we come to Appendix A. Personally identifiable student data collected by the DESE. I'll just go over the big ones. School Safety and Discipline Report, known as the SSDR. Incident level collection of all offenses and disciplines throughout the school year. That's going to chase you all over town when you get out of school. Post-secondary enrollment. Student level database of enrollment and degree completion in colleges and universities. Data is obtained from the National Student Clearinghouse, not to be confused with the Publishers Clearinghouse. This stuff is going to follow you into your career. Homeless. Student level database of all students reporting as homeless by LEAs. Now, here's a list of a few of the organizations who are getting all this data. I'm just going to tell you the ones I highlighted that I think were the most interesting. The National Student Clearinghouse, the Department of Transitional Assistance, the Department of Youth Services, the Department of Children and Families, my old buddies from the DCF, formerly known as, what the heck were they known as? Yeah, those guys. I had them sicked on me a couple of times for no good reason. Brown University. They're conducting a study of the causal relationship between turnaround school strategies and student achievement outcomes. Mighty nice of them. The Center for Research on Educational Outcomes at Stanford University. Not to be outdone, UMass is into it. The Mathematica, and that's not a typo, Mathematica Policy Research. They're getting MCAS scores. The National Opinion Research Center. And wait till you hear this one. They're studying the effects of data masking techniques for research databases. What the heck does that mean? The Center for Research on Educational Outcomes at Harvard University. My dad was from South Boston. Beliefs, habits, and cognitive capacities associated with long-term educational success. The Thomas Hire and Associates. They're reviewing SPED in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, special education. The Presidents and Fellows of Harvard College, examining the effects of district turnaround, the case of Lawrence, Mass. I'd like to meet some of those fellows. The National Bureau of Economic Research. Why are some charter schools more effective than others? The Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy, University of Michigan. Why are some charter schools more effective than others? They seem to be very interested in charter schools. Educational Testing Services. Validating the use of growth measures from state standards-based summative assessments for students with disabilities. Those are all on the middle. The University of Rhode Island, examining principal leadership and its relationship to teacher job satisfaction and student academic achievement. The University of California, Berkeley, I remember them from the 60s. A structural model of charter school choice and academic achievement. Lighthouse Counseling, evaluating Massachusetts Math and Science Partnership, professional development programs. Tufts University, the physical activity in schools study. What on earth does that mean? I'm gonna have to look that one up. Northeastern University Center for Labor Market Studies. A study of college enrollment, persistence, and graduation of Boston public charter school graduates. I don't know if some of you, probably none of you, old enough to remember back in the 60s, IBM was involved in a scam where they would go into high schools and try to direct female students into becoming key punch operators because they needed a whole bunch of them. And they didn't want them to get into professions. They wanted them to sit there and type. Now finally, let's take a look at the current 603 CMR 2307. As current as I could find anyway. Access to third parties. Doesn't sound too bad. Except for the provisions of 603 CMR 2307 4A through now H, you remember that from before, no third party shall have access to information in or from a student record without the specific informed written consent of the eligible student or parent. When granting consent, the eligible student or parent shall have the right to designate which parts of the student record shall be released to the third party. A copy of such consent shall be retained by the eligible student or parent and a duplicate placed in the temporary record. And so we get down to A. Here are the exceptions. A school may release the following directory information: a student's name, address, telephone listing. I don't think that was in there before. Place of birth, that's new. Major field of study, dates of attendance, weight and height of members of athletic teams. I don't remember that one from before. Class, participation in, I don't know what class is. It's separated by commas. Participation in officially recognized activities and sports degrees, honors and awards, and post-high school plans without the consent of the eligible student or parent, provided that the school gives public notice of the types of information it may release under 603 CMR, blah, 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 and allows eligible students and parents a reasonable time after such notice to request that this information not be released. B, upon receipt of a court order or lawfully issued subpoena, and you remember that one, that hasn't really changed. C, a school may release information regarding a student upon receipt of a request from the Department of Social Services, a probation officer, a judge, or the Department of Youth Services under the provisions of 11951B. D, federal and state, this is the big one now, this is the big finish. Federal, state, and local education officials, and this is like a 60-point font here, and their authorized agents shall have access to student records. That means anybody they care to give it to, if they can make a case for receiving the data, as necessary in connection with the audit, evaluation, or enforcement of federal and state education laws or programs. So anything they come up with as a program, they can hand your child's individually identifiable data over to them, and they're supposed to adhere to various levels of security, but who the heck knows if they do? Thank you very much.
Next, we have Kevin Lynham. Am I saying that right? Yeah. Okay. He's a Whitman Hanson graduate, a resident of Whitman, and a member of the Whitman Hanson Regional School Committee. He's a stay-at-home dad with 4 children, 2 at Conley School, and a part-time attorney.
Are you all done already? Hi, everyone. I'm not here to give a presentation, but I'm here to take any questions anybody might have about Whitman Hanson, about what's going on, how this might impact the schools. I would like to pass on that a lot of the information we're talking about can be accessed by going to Whitman Hanson's website. From there, you can be linked to the Department of Education's various documents, internal school documents that have to do with what's being taught and what grades or what subjects are available and what grades and that sort of thing. So if you want to find out merely, factual information about that stuff, you can find it straight if you go to the district's website. So, for example, if you want to know what track does my student need to be on to take algebra in 8th grade or something like that, that was raised before, you can find it there. You go there, and it's specified there. So it's just a means for getting more information about these topics. They're really complicated. And I'd like to sort of narrow the scope with respect to the district here. Whether the origin of the Common Core was a good idea or not, how it should be changed, what should be going on nationally, what the state should be doing with respect to data collection is all way above the district level. What the district recently had to decide was whether to do a 1-year trial of the PARCC exam. Now, the district decided to do so But it should probably be said that that decision was not an endorsement of the PARCC exam. It's a trial. Now, I don't mean this to be pejorative, but we're kind of bribed to do it. We're incentivized to do it. Here's the deal. If you agree to do the PARCC for this year, the district is held harmless with respect to student exams. So when the state looks at student scores this year on the PARCC, they don't really count. So the school cannot be penalized. So suppose the scores drop from the state testing last year. There can be no extra state action, extra requirements that the school remediate any issues that might have come from the testing. So that was part of the motivation for why it was chosen in the first place. There's also a sense at the committee level that giving the students a trial run of taking exams on tablets or new devices would benefit them in the long run, that our kids would be in a better position when the state gives us this new exam, which we don't know. Eventually the choice won't be ours. Eventually the state will decide what our kids have to take. So there was a sense on the committee that it would be a good idea for our students to have a chance to try it out and be in a better position to succeed. So that's what happened. That's how that debate went. As for myself, I voted against implementing the PARCC exam. And the main reason I did that was I don't see the case being made that this is actually a good test. I don't see anybody making any representation as to what the quality of the exam is. There's very little discussion about what is an effective exam. What does it look like? What is this exam for? I have 2 students in Conley School right now, and I'll have a 3rd next year, and then eventually a 4th. And so if I say anything doesn't make sense, that's why. But when I talk to my daughter, who's in 3rd grade, so she's scheduled to take PARCC, I tell her, you know, I care about what your teacher says about you and what your grades and your report card are. Right? These state exams are not really for you. These are ways the state monitors how districts are performing. So, but that does sort of raise a question, how much of a priority should that be for us in general? I mean, how much time is reasonable for our kids to take tests to show the state that their school is doing a good job teaching them? Is there some need for that? What is the need for that? And what's a reasonable amount of time to spend on that? My concern with implementing the PARCC is it feels like it's sort of in the trial stage right now. That last year, the exams were conducted, the results were collected by the company that produces the test, and they were kept. Don't know how the kids did, no idea. I'm not sure how much closer they are now than they were last year. And I'm not saying they aren't or are, I'm saying I don't know. So how has this exam been vetted? Does it do it? PARCC was not made by the people who developed the Common Core. You know, the Common Core came first, PARCC came later. Does it even do a good job of doing what it claims to do? I don't know the answer to that. Is there any interest in sharing any of the results at all from whoever might have the results? How are kids doing on this? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? I don't know the answer to those questions either. What is the procedure for improving it? Suppose kids don't do well. Suppose they do terribly in one year. How does it get fixed for the next year? How soon are teachers going to be able to effectively show kids what's expected of them on these exams? With MCAS, there's templates provided. You know, teachers can go there and see what a right answer is supposed to look like and teach the kids to perform in that way. I mean, how do they do it with PARCC? I don't know how they do it with PARCC. None of this has been explained to us. We hear a lot about it being on tablets. I think it's a mistake to equate PARCC with a tablet. And the tablet is the means by which the test is given, but it's still a test. It's still made by people, it's questions, and the kids are asked to answer these questions. So my question is, how good are the questions themselves? Are they good or aren't they? I don't know. I'm not going to vote for something with all these questions about it. I just don't know about this. And then there's big picture questions on testing in general. And this goes beyond the school committee level, but are our kids over-tested? Is this another step towards that? Is that reason alone to resist a new test, just to say, look, we don't want it to look like we're endorsing further testing by adopting a test, which, you wonder about that when half of districts opt in and half don't, and you don't know why. It's just put on the Department of Education's website that about half of districts have opted in 50-something%. But what's behind that, we don't know. Where are we in terms of what we want our kids to be doing in the schools? We are going to have testing, right? I mean, there have been some successes in implementing statewide testing, so it's here to stay. So it doesn't seem a realistic option to simply remove all testing, but maybe we can have a say in what direction the testing takes next. It's not, determined where we're going to be a year, 2 years from now. And that's the thing that's my point of emphasis tonight. We talked about a lot of things, large scope. Much of it has to do with the legislature, some of it has to do with the federal government. Very little of it has to do with the school districts themselves. They don't get to decide these things. Our district tries to comply with the law with some zeal, I think. There's something of a passion in our district for staying ahead of things, getting out in front and making sure we're not caught off guard. Based on what we heard tonight, there might be concern about the direction the Whitman Hanson curriculum is going. So I'd just like to briefly point out that the state framework for what students have to do at each grade level and how they have to perform is available. Go onto the Whitman Hanson website and you're basically linked to the Department of Education documents on what students have to learn. If you look at them closely, there's a lot, it's not specifying exactly what kids have to be doing the second they walk in the door, what books they have to be reading, what they have to be doing. There's a lot of wiggle room, and we can take advantage of that, and I'm confident that our administration is working on that and already has done good work on doing that. There's some concern about how math is taught. I can tell you, practically speaking, what has happened at the elementary level. So before the new standards were put in place, our elementary students were on a curriculum called Everyday Math. It was a spiral curriculum, they call it, where kids are introduced to a subject, then they move on to another one, then they come back. And the theme of it, because it's everyday math, to make math interesting, go in your house. Go take a look at what your mercury thermometer says and read it. And so, my daughter comes home, I need to look at our thermometer. We don't have a thermometer. When I want the weather, I look on my phone or on the computer. So there was something a little outdated about this program. So they have a new program called Envision Math, which is a different strategy focusing on incremental mastery. So instead of going round and round, you do a subject, master it, move on to the next one. Lots of cumulative review. So you're reviewing stuff continuously from what you were doing before and what you're doing before. And there's been some concern about how math is taught. I would like to point out, I've seen some very impressive, seemingly effective work done in my daughter's math class. So for example, when you're working with addition, and a kid can tell you that 3 plus 4 is 7, you go through a few more facts, then you get to 4 plus 3, they get it wrong. How come they know 4 plus 3 is 7? When they get to 3 plus 4, they get screwed, they get a little confused. And so they only kind of understand what they're doing. It's a process, right? When you start as toddlers, you teach them to count to 10. You put 2 pieces of paper in front of them, and they'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they'll go up to 10. They get to recite the words, but they don't get counting yet. That comes later. There's an attempt, and yeah, I can't speak to the larger picture of way down the road how it pays off, but there is an attempt now to teach kids what you're actually doing when you're adding, to visualize it, to understand what you're doing when you're adding, and what is going on in your head when you're trying to figure out a problem. We just adopted the program, but I do see some positive things coming from the Whitman Hanson curriculum at the moment. I just wanted to put that out there. I do share concerns about, generally, there's a concern about after you adopt Common Core, how much time are you spending on classics and that sort of thing. And I think that is also an issue of how a district implements the program. So if a Common Core says that you have to read 70% informational text at a certain point, but also says that all of your reading counts, how are you doing that? Are you putting that all in your English class? Or are you giving them informational text in other classes so that when you're taking English, let's say in high school, in Whitman Hanson, there's 4 classes a day? Is that about right? You have block scheduling, so you have English once. So a large percentage of that could be literature, as long as you're reading informational text in science class, in your history class, that sort of thing. So it doesn't have to squeeze out the actual literature part if you do it smart. So it's something that we're working on, that the district is working on. So it's just as a general, I'm just doing the basic stuff. So I'm not trying to get into the super complicated piece of this, but the Common Core, as I take it to mean, is there's a Massachusetts document that gives a framework for what schools are teaching. Within that, it's on the district to develop an appropriate curriculum. There is a disclaimer on the state education department's website that this is not a prescription for advanced studies, that it's on the districts themselves to develop their own advanced studies. So hopefully what that means is that we're not bringing everybody down to a certain level, but that this is what's expected of any student in a grade, and that we're free to develop further coursework and studies and requirements that give them a quality education by the time they're finished. So the reason I'm saying all this is to say that as this plays out on the district level, there's things that we can always be doing to make it work for us. And I think the district is at this moment succeeding in that, and I'm very motivated to help that along as best I can. So that's where this plays out, and I'll be happy to take questions about Whitman Hanson and how this plays out, but we do have Jeff Deal here. Jeff, did you have anything to offer us? Because I guess where the rubber hits the road here is at the State House. That's where most of this comes down. So I'm going to let Jeff take over, take the bigger picture questions. Thank you.
First of all, I want to apologize. I'm on the 5th day of a flu-like thing that I thought I was almost over, and so I'm sorry for the coughing and all that. Anyway, a couple of things. First of all, Michael, thanks for having this forum. And I also should add Jamie, Summer. I mean, you guys have been out there, dozens, 100 communities by now, making this issue, the awareness of this issue, first and foremost with school committees, parents, and even teachers. One of the things I want to mention here that's very interesting is the Mass Teachers Association, MTA, elected a anti-Common Core president this time around, just to let you kind of know where things really stand at this point. A couple things, housekeeping. My wife's studio right across the street is not subject to Common Core, Boss Academy for Dance, so we're fully free of any requirements there. The other thing too is this has been an interesting 4 years for me in the legislature. I was just re-elected for my 3rd term, and the first 4 years was just things were moving so quickly. I beat a 2-term incumbent who was the vice chair of education, and one of the things I asked in a debate was, why was there no hearings on Common Core? And he said, that was something that he wished that had happened. Now, he's the vice chair of education committee. That's something you're supposed to implement, I would think, if you're in that role. So he's not there, I'm here, and we have Common Core. We adopted it with no hearings. There was a $250 million sort of payoff to adopt it, using Race to the Top funds. And we have that. Now, the other problem is you have to look at this holistically. This isn't just education. Obviously, healthcare, these are sort of national overreaches, in my opinion, on states' rights. I'm sort of a federalist at heart as well. And so at the same time this was happening, we were also dealing with the Affordable Care Act, the adoption of the Affordable Care Act. And again, that was a similar situation where if Massachusetts, which was the model for universal health care coverage, did not adopt it, it really wasn't going to fly. And so it was our governor's, decision to not ask for a waiver on the Affordable Care Act, even though we, the legislature, or portions of the legislature, had asked for a waiver since we were the model for coverage. And ultimately, look what happened. Over 250,000 people lost their coverage overnight who were currently covered. We now are subsidizing those plans and spending almost $1 billion to replace a $3.5 million website that functioned to get people connected to a healthcare plan. These are terrible, terrible decisions being implemented by our state, coming from the federal government. And the Affordable Care Act, is proven wrong. And I think Common Core, we have some serious concerns about what happens when government overreach steps on the rights of not only our state, but also really the funding. Where's the money going to come from? And I was talking to Jamie just before this, because one of the things that I latched myself onto for the last year and a half is the gas tax indexing. By the way, I should thank Hanson. You were the #1 town in the state percentage-wise to vote to repeal the automatic gas tax indexing. It was really, I was amazed when I got the spreadsheet from the Secretary of State to see where the percentages were. I saw Hanson was right at the top, and my other 3 towns that I represent Abington, Whitman, East Bridgewater, were also in the top 20, but Hanson was #1. That was fantastic. Thank you for listening, understanding, and getting the concept. And as you can tell, the roads and bridges haven't all collapsed the day after elections. And I'll be working on that as well. I've actually called for an audit of DOT and MBTA because we know there's a lot of money being misspent there as well. We have a new governor that's in that I think also is going to be looking at a lot of these initiatives, and I think Common Core is clearly one of the things that Charlie Baker is aware of as an issue. In 2010, he testified against Common Core. He has said that he was going to take this first year of PARCC testing and look at it to see what the results are and to see whether we should remain in PARCC or we should pull out of PARCC. I think it's going to be very important for all of you to stay, not just here in Whitman, Hanson, or whatever towns, Halifax, it's going to be important to spread the word to make sure that once we do get the results at the end of this school year, we let the governor's office and your local legislator know, from your state rep to your state senator. Please let them know your feelings so that they are aware, and we can all work together as a legislature to decide whether to stay in or to get out. And let me just look at some notes here as I was taking, and I apologize again. So, just Kevin, one quick point you were making about testing. Tony Wagner is, by the way, a fellow at Harvard. He's a really nice fellow at Harvard. He wrote a book called The Global Achievement Gap. And one of the things Tony Wagner talked about was over-testing as well. One of the big problems, and I think even teachers will admit this, is that testing falls into kind of three categories with the classroom. You've got your high achievers that the teacher knows are going to do well. You've got your low achievers that probably aren't going to do well in test, and you've got your bubble. And it's the teachers tend to teach to that middle group that they want to make sure get over the hump to score the right test they need. And so that's one fault that he finds with current testing. One thing that, and the other problem, obviously, I think everybody knows, is teaching to the test. You know, the material tends to be directed towards what they know will be in the test versus just doing a well-rounded curriculum. And one of the things Tony said was, do we test bottles of Coke, every bottle of Coke and Pepsi as it comes off the line? No, they do random testing. We could potentially do more sporadic testing of a few classrooms in different districts of different age groups. Do that randomized testing so that not only do you not stress every kid out, but you also sort of keep the teachers honest. They don't know if they're going to be the ones having their kids tested or not. So I think that's just something to think about. The book Global Achievement Gap, I think, really is a very interesting book that opens a can of worms that I don't necessarily know the federal government, the national education wants to have open, but it makes some great points there. Well, let me see what other notes I have here. The MTA, there again says, oh, I should say this. When I first got into office, I was taken down to Newport. A few legislators were taken down to Newport, Rhode Island, and given a briefing on Common Core in 2011, shortly after it was adopted. And we were being told it was a plane that they were building as they were flying it. Okay, and so yeah, so that's why a lot of this the 6 months it took to develop it, they were way behind. They were talking about how far behind they were, and one of the things they talked about was it had to be done through this Governors Association to avoid the feeling of this national takeover of education, because they were aware that there's currently an anti-national takeover of healthcare. So it was a concerted effort, and what they did was they, at the time, had regionalized it into an eastern United States and a western United States, and PARCC would be the eastern United States, and I forget what the name of the western was. But things kind of fell apart as states didn't adopt, and there was kind of fracturing of those. But for the most part, Eastern Mass, I think, remained the PARCC portion of it, and that's the way they could say it's not a national initiative. It's what it is. It's a governor's attempt, But they were aware that they were basically doing an end around on this, and they were explaining that to us. It was quite unique. And ironically, I was taken down to Baltimore about a year or two later to be given a briefing on the Affordable Care Act, and at the time we met down there, it was about I want to say a month and a half before states had to decide whether they're going to use their own exchanges, healthcare exchanges, or they were going to use a federal healthcare exchange. The only problem was, and as many legislators that were there, including the guy from Michigan that was completely irate and totally within his right to be irate, there was no federal healthcare exchange example to even review to see if they wanted to use that within 6 weeks. And most states can't just, there's not one person, the government can't say, yeah, we're going to use that. It's got to go through, it's got to be reviewed by, your healthcare committees, your legislature, there's about 20 different checklists of people who have to approve something, and they didn't even have this thing ready. So we've seen twice, in just the recent few years, major parts of our government functions, education and healthcare, being run roughshod over, and us being basically left in the dust in the decision-making process. So those are just my thoughts and opinions. As a legislator, I have one vote out of 160 in the House. There's 40 in the Senate, and there's a governor. Your voices matter. What's happening right now across the state is pretty remarkable. Something that I didn't expect in Massachusetts, to be quite honest with you. And the fact that the Mass Teachers Association is also working against this initiative is pretty unique as well. So I think there's some merit to what's being done. I will say on behalf of Whitman Hanson School System, I think that they're doing everything they can to try to maintain the fiscal funds that the funds that are available to them by the state. I do find that it's very challenging to know that our commissioner, Mitchell Chester, has a financial stake in implementing PARCC and still has discretion over the funding of our school systems. And so you can basically kind of connect the dots there as to why schools are being sort of urged to participate in PARCC. But I think, again, we've got a governor who says, let's give it 1 year of testing, and let's see where we're at. I think that probably is our recourse at this point, but I think that forums like this are critical to staying vigilant, and I anticipate Jamie won't be getting much sleep for another year and a half. I did 16 months on the gas tax. I think you've been doing, what, 24, 36 months already on this? And I probably see another 2 or 3 years of you working on this too.
Don't tell my wife.
Right. But it really is at every level. At every level, you need to be aware. Watching what's coming home in your kids' folders. You know, I've got 13 and an 8-year-old. My 8-year-old is in the same class with Kevin, Mary, his daughter Mary, my daughter Emily, and we work with them on their coursework each day, as we're asked to, and I think is right. And so we monitor what's going on, and to see it, if we see a change in the negative, I think that it'll be very disappointing. And I think every one of you should stay vigilant with your children and the school boards and your legislators. So thanks for having me.
So at this time, if anybody has any questions for myself, Bob Johnson, Jamie, Representative Deal, you're welcome to ask them. There are things that you can do locally in your community, some things that are already being done locally in different communities. John Chabon, if you would just want to talk for a minute about what's being done in Halifax, that'd be great. And then open the floor to questions for any of us. Kevin, too. Sorry about that.
Yes, just to let you know what we're doing in Halifax. We're trying to follow some of the same things that Lakeville did by putting basically a no confidence article on the town meeting to reject Common Core, just so that it will bring publicity to the problem and bring awareness. We're going to be sending letters to the boards of selectmen, to Halifax, to the school committee, rejecting, asking them to sponsor articles to reject the Common Core. To Halifax, rejected the PARCC testing this year. The school committee, we're going to suggest that the board of selectmen continue to tell them they should reject the PARCC testing, and also that they should support House bills like Kiko Laurel has proposed, that Representative Deal did sign as well, just outlining the steps that might be taken before the final vote for whether PARCC testing is adopted or not. And that's something you can do locally. And then the same type of thing, collect signatures for your representatives in your area and meet with them so they know, because unless they are aware of your sentiment, they're not going to make an informed decision. And that's basically all I have to say. Any questions on that? I have a template of the letter that we're going to, if anyone wants to look at that. And thank you.
Any questions for any? Go ahead.
I have a question for Jamie. I was surprised that you didn't mention No Child Left Behind, which was a federal program. Did that kind of set the stage for core curriculum? Could you speak a little bit about that? I think that was a Bush idea.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. There's in 2001, President George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind law, which was had broad bipartisan support. I can't remember what the percentage was off the top of my head, but it had an overwhelming number of congressmen and senators that voted for it. At that time, I was working in state government and began shortly thereafter working for the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability, which was basically an auditing office with its independent auditing office within state government that looked at school districts and evaluated and provided sort of an MRI of school districts, not just how the students were performing, but how the leadership and governance, where the money was going, et cetera. The thing about the No Child Left Behind law is that because Massachusetts had already started ed reform back in 1993, we were really light years ahead of what was being talked about in 2001. And I would say that in a lot of regards, they talked about how No Child Left Behind was basically creating the requirement that states have state testing and have state standards. No sooner did the law get signed, but then states started gaming the system, because what they would do is they would actually set their standards and their testing pretty low. Massachusetts, again, was so far ahead. Our standards were so far ahead. They are already beginning to be on a trajectory where they were going to head us where we ultimately arrived at being best in the country. But I have to say, people didn't pay a lot of attention to it, other than the sense that there was a lot of they called it adequate yearly progress, which is this sort of benchmark of how schools were doing. And what was getting clearer and clearer is that the architects of No Child Left Behind hadn't been very careful about how they did it. So enormous, even in Massachusetts, enormous number of schools and districts would be getting put on this watch list under No Child Left Behind. The reality of it gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that the founders were really wise. They understand that the feds can't do this. We know this for 50 years, that the federal role in K-12 education has been largely ineffective. It was true of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was true of No Child Left Behind. I think in 5 years, after we've been 10 years into this race to the top, or Common Core and all this, it's going to end up being a wash. And the thing that I guess I'm struck by is that Achieve Inc. was founded by the Governors Association. They're the ones who owned and sort of started the PARCC testing consortia. Some of the players around Achieve were active in the early 90s when there was a push for national standards. And so, the records of the people driving this, whether it's the U.S. Department of Education, or whether it's the Governors Association, or the Council of Chief State School Officers, Achieve, is mediocre. It's not, they don't have good records. That's one of the things that's really disconcerting, is that we have this proven model of things that Massachusetts has done that has led to all these gains. And then you have the people that are pushing the Common Core and the PARCC, and there's an enormous number of overlap between, say, Achieve and PARCC and Common Core. Their records are not good. You wouldn't want to stake your child's future on the work of these people, because in the last 20 years, at least, they can't point to one place where they've actually improved student achievement. But that's sort of a long way of saying, you're exactly right. The No Child Left Behind law really moved us in this direction where Common Core and PARCC and all this became more possible, because they kind of created the bureaucratic template through which Common Core and the testing can all kind of be dumped in. And it's remarkable, because left, right, liberal, conservative, teacher unions, people despise the No Child Left Behind law because it was so ineffective. And yet, I've heard people describe the race to the top and the Common Core as No Child Left Behind on steroids. I hope that answers it.
Hi, I'm Fred Small. I'm one of your school committee members from Whitman. And this is directed at Jeff, but first I would just want to give a little bit of background. The PARCC test, and when it came before school committee for us to decide whether or not to do PARCC this year or do MCAS, I had walked into that meeting firmly convinced in my mind I'm going to vote for MCAS. That was my decision. And then I heard a presentation. And then I heard the fact that we'd be held harmless and that our scores could improve, but they could not go down. That, coupled with the fact that next year, whether it's going to be PARCC or something else, because MCAS as we know it today is gone next year. It's going to be an electronic type of a test. I felt it was going to be giving our students the best advantage to go forward and have an electronic test. So that's why I voted for PARCC. Since then, certain things that I've learned about PARCC. Attended a conference down the Cape last month, and there was a gentleman from the Saugus School Committee, and he brought up the fact that PARCC was advertising for people to correct tests. And they were advertising on Craigslist, and they were looking to pay $8 per hour. You were in that meeting too, Dan? I mean, I find that a little bit concerning that they're looking for people on Craigslist to correct a test for our children. The current board that is going to be deciding, and this is a two-part question, Jeff. You may or may not have the answer. I don't mean to put you on the spot. The current board that's going to be deciding whether or not we go PARCC, MCAS, and if it's MCAS, by the way, it would be something that we would design within the state, and we do it ourselves similar to the way we did MCAS, or another organization. Will that board be changing with the change in the corner office? Number one. Number two, with the foundation budget, and I know there's a review committee, how is that tying into Common Core? Because we need money in this district, and we need it desperately. And the state has done nothing but cut us. And well, you know how I feel about that. And then third, just a quick hope and aspiration and my personal intention that the mass framework that we have is a guideline. And that I would like to think, and I believe that Whitman Hanson will always use that as a baseline and want to exceed that for our children, so that we're not just teaching them the basics of Common Core, but we're giving them the very best education that we can. And that's pretty much mine.
First one was, what was that again?
They're back in the 90s, they were sort of a spin-off from the Governors Association. You know, and I guess the thing that's important to realize is that Massachusetts, through the PARCC, is basically in a consortia of other states. And other states that are in PARCC are Louisiana and Arkansas and Mississippi. I mean, these are some of the lowest performing states in the country. And frankly, they're in another category altogether in terms of academic performance. And so any changes or any that Massachusetts would want to make to the PARCC test, because we don't own it. I mean, and we really, I mean, people say, oh, well, you know, we'll have a seat at the table. Under MCAS, we own the table, right? We don't have to check with Mississippi to see where we want to develop the questions, whether we want to release the test question, all of that. So I think
the impression
yep.
that was given at a Mass Association of School Committees meeting was that the PARCC test given in Massachusetts would be designed under the Mass curriculum and frameworks.
Well,
that was the impression that was given to us, that it was designed for us.
Right, and the thing is that the whole point of national standards is uniformity, right? The whole, I mean, if they wanted to just stay with each individual state developing their curriculum frameworks, they would have gone, they stayed under the old system. The whole idea is that Massachusetts and Mississippi have the same standards. And that's really what it is, because when we adopted Common Core, we had to adopt them through Race to the Top, 85% word for word, right? So we had some wiggle room to add 15%. But the problem, though, is that those are the standards, right? Then there's the test, the PARCC test. And the PARCC test is going to be the same in Massachusetts as in Mississippi. And so whatever we add as a little 15% onto it, that's not going to be on the test. And what we know about this relationship between standards and tests is that, you know, for good or for ill, teachers teach to the test. So what's also sort of different about this equation from what MCAS was is that part of Race to the Top was a federal teacher evaluation program too. So the teachers are going to be evaluated on the federal tests. And guess what? You know, you could be a teacher that could teach literature. You know, you could do poetry. You could teach all this stuff. Problem is, it's not going to be on the test. And you're going to get evaluated on it. So guess what's going to happen? You are going to pick the thing that's in your self-interest. You're going to teach what is in the standard. So, I mean, I've been to a lot of communities that say, well, we're going to exceed it. But the fact is that they may do that, and that's great, and that's their prerogative. But over time, this really is designed to be uniform, and not just uniform between communities within Massachusetts, but uniform within various states. I guess I'd say one other thing too. So on the Board of Ed,
Can I just add one?
Yeah.
And the thought behind that was just portability. They wanted, the theory is that if somebody were to move from Massachusetts to another state, there'd be a portability in the education they're learning. I think that was the reasonable expectation that they were trying to do at the time.
Right. And Rep. Deal is exactly right. The new governor will have an enormous amount of influence over the Board of Education because he gets to pick the chair of the Board of Ed, and he gets to pick the Secretary of Education, which has sort of veto authority over the Department of Ed's budget. But he will not have control over, in terms of the voting members of the Board of Ed, for quite a while. Governor Patrick has been in office for 2 terms, and so all of the appointments are his appointments. And those are, generally speaking, to the same kinds of folks that approved Common Core, and given that the Commissioner of Education really works for the Board of Ed. He doesn't work for the governor. So it's I would describe it as being sort of in limbo. I think that the governor-elect could he could pull us out of park. There's no question. He could do an executive order. Other governors have done this and pull us out of park. And that's what I would encourage him to do. But there's going to be a lot of wrangling back and forth. Now, your question about the Chapter 70 or the foundation budget is that, the previous ed reform was basically the money in exchange for the standards and the MCAS, right? And, I'm not an expert on the ins and outs of Chapter 70. You need to be a statistician on, there's like 5 people in Massachusetts, that understand it. It's enormously, enormously complicated. But what we know is that it's, at this point, it's not a strict formula. It's basically been tinkered with in a variety of different ways in the legislature. And so it's not a strict, hard and fast formula. It probably does need to be revised. But, if the template that we've used is the money in exchange for the accountability or the standards, right?
Part of that formula, we're a school district.
Yep.
We show our health insurance within our budget.
Right.
Where a town pulls it out separately. So a town's foundation formula is different than a school district's.
Right.
I mean, we made a commitment to try and implement all-day kindergarten at no cost to the residents. And Rockland does it, it's fully funded through Chapter 70. Us, $25 per pupil, that's what we would have received from the state. Can't afford to do it. It's ridiculous what the state's
It's a
doing.
decision that I have no control over it at all. I'm not in state government, but it's a valid one. There's a lot of issues. You hear a lot of issues about Chapter 70 being broken and needing reform and all that. And so that is all. Obviously, if the deal was the money in exchange, the state and local money in exchange for the standards and the accountability, they've kind of damaged one end of it, and it does call into question how all that gets negotiated, because there are enormous unfunded mandates that go with Common Core and the PARCC testing, and whether it's someone was talking about the iPads that districts have had to buy, or it is that's something that the state didn't pick up the tab on, and my guess is they wouldn't pick up the tab going forward.
Jim, quick question. Jim again. I heard correctly that the tests were conducted and we cannot know the results, or they won't tell us. Did they say why? What was their answer?
I think there's 2 things. The thing that's important to realize is that here in Massachusetts, almost every major editorial board has done numerous in-house editorials against Common Core and PARCC. Representative Deal mentioned that the new president of the teachers union is anti-Common Core. It was an upset victory. The heir apparent was defeated, and it was an enormous surprise to everybody. And so it's it's kind of a fluid landscape. But I think the big reason why the PARCC folks have not, under MCAS, they have to release the test questions. That's state law. They have to release the test questions. But I think the big reason why they haven't released the results is they don't have to. They're not, PARCC and the folks that developed Common Core, the Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, and we've submitted Freedom of Information Act searches to them and to the department Mass Department of Ed and the U.S. Department of Ed, they do not have to comply with it. They're not a public entity. They are not, I mean, that's the thing that's sort of disconcerting is that, is this really accountable to state legislators? Is it accountable to governors and elected officials? And I think the answer that they would, if they wouldn't tell you candidly, but if they were being candid, they would say the point of it is to have it out of the reach of elected officials so that no one governor or state legislator or state can really control it without the same kind of transparency and accountability in which, you know, all public officials are held to. I don't know if that answers your...
No, it does, I understand.
Was that last year? This year they're releasing the results. Last year was only while it was in the test phase. In the actual, and this is my interpretation, I just want to make sure I'm understanding everything right. Last year where they were trying to test the test, so to speak, that's why they didn't want to release any results. That this year the results will be released to us, and there will be accountability.
I mean, I think a lot of it is a black box. I mean, I look at this for a living. I've been researching it very closely for 5 years. We've, you know, done these FOIA searches. They are not going out of their way to be forthcoming with information. Again, just think about it. What you're saying is like they piloted in our public schools a test for our children, and they are not releasing the results. They're deciding whether to do that or not. I mean, that seems to me...
Supposedly, and
Yep.
you know, and I don't want to defend them. I don't want to sound like I'm defending them. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, because if they don't release the results this year, and this is the manner our children are being tested on, there's going to be a lot of explaining to do.
No, I think that's right.
I mean, that's, you know.
They may very well release the test questions and the results going forward, but what we know thus far is that they haven't.
Bill?
Hi, Phil Andrews from Hanson. Actually, my question is for Kevin. Actually, it's specific kind of to the Whitman Hanson district. You'd mentioned that when it was kind of being debated on whether or not to adopt the PARCC testing, that there was an incentive offered. And I think what I heard you say was that the incentive was that no matter the result of the testing, the school's score as compared to other schools in the state would not go down. Is that the only incentive, or was there something else?
Well, my understanding of the vote was that there were two basic advantages that were perceived in doing the PARCC trial run this year. The first one is basically get the state off your back for a year. So schools the state uses the MCAS results to categorize your schools as level 1, 2, 3. There's 4, I think, but very few people are at 4. You're wiggling around 1, 2, and 3, and very few are at 1. And your school is given, your district is equated with whatever the lowest scoring school in the district got. So Whitman Hanson tends to, over the time I've been in the school committee, have level 1 schools with maybe 1 or 2 level 2 schools mixed in. So by agreeing to do the PARCC trial run this year, we're at level 2 this year, we can't go below level 2. And each level, and basically with each categorization the state gives you, you're given a report from the state as to how good you did, and then what you have to do to satisfy them that you're going to fix that. So if your level goes down, you've got more work to do. Suddenly our administrators have to run around and do the paperwork to make the state happy. They're not going to have to do that this year. Not that there was much danger of it happening anyway, but by doing this trial run, they don't have to do that this year. And the other perceived advantage of it was basically to embrace the new format of testing, to give the kids a training this year on taking the test on the iPads, so that they'll be better ready to do it eventually when it comes. Those were the two perceived advantages in voting for that.
So can I just follow up?
Yes, of course.
So you mentioned you have 2 kids in Whitman as
Yes,
well.
at Common
School. So my son goes to the middle school, and I get an email with the school's score, as compared to other schools in the state. And I've noticed that since 2011, consistently, the middle school rating has gone down a couple of points each year. And I think I heard that we adopted the Common Core curriculum in 2011 or 2010. And I'm just wondering, is that a coincidence?
My understanding of middle school performance, right, is that you're dealing with an age group that is more challenging to deal with than the two ends. The first, when they're youngest, you've got more motivated young kids. In high school, it counts. They have to do well on it. Middle school, you're kind of in this middle in between, and you'll see. I mean, if you look at the results, we're very close to the state average in almost every metric. Like, if you look at the categorized results, if you see the chart, you will see our district at about the state.
Closer to state average every year.
On some tiny points we're above, on some tiny we're below, but I think it would be a fair characterization to say we're at about the state average on test results, have been for a while, and across the state you'll see middle school scores lower than elementary and high school. I mean, that's what I've seen in looking at MCAS results at the committee, and I think Fred was also on the
To
committee.
throw an even bigger curveball at you, some of the reports rank you as to how much you've progressed from your last score. So if you already have a good standard, it's harder to go up. And it's, I know there was a big article in the Globe, affluent towns such as Wellesley and Wayland, they're not scored or ranked as high compared to some of their surrounding towns because they're not showing that advancement year after year because they're already performing at a high level, and it frustrates them. So it's just another curveball. I don't know what information they actually gave you, but was sent. I haven't seen that, but I'm just saying that's a possibility too, just to confuse things.
I wonder if I can make one comment that runs parallel to this man's question. So I mentioned that in 2013, Massachusetts is #1 in the country on the NAEP test. They test in 4th and 8th grade, right? And 4th grade reading and 3rd grade reading for MCAS is the strongest predictor of future academic achievement. So the good news is that Massachusetts is still #1 in the country on 4th grade reading on the NAEP, right? The bad news is that now we're 4 years into Common Core alignment or adoption. Guess what state was the biggest drop in the country? Massachusetts. 5-point drop. So it's a predictor, as we're seeing Common Core be implemented, it's a predictor of what's to come for Massachusetts. We're still likely to be among the higher performing states, but we're definitely losing our edge. The evidence is clear that we've already plateaued. And we're #1, but we're not getting better. And this very, very predictive measure of 4th grade reading on NAEP, we've had the biggest drop in the country. So it is having an impact in Massachusetts, just not a good impact.
Mike?
Can anybody on the panel tell me if a child can be compelled to take the PARCC testing by the state? When I say compelled, I mean, is it mandatory? Is there a way to opt out? And what is the process for opting out of the test?
Yeah, I would say the language we've heard from Mitchell Chester is that you can't opt out, but you can refuse. And so if you're going to use language, refuse to have your child take the test, and they have, the Department of Education has instructed school districts to place your child in a different academic activity for that day, basically.
So they can't.
Because it's not, because they're not being held accountable for it, because it's in the pilot phase. That's my understanding.
So even though they don't take the test, they still have to engage in an academic activity for the time that the test is taking place?
That's my understanding of it, and that's what Halifax did with my daughter, is at first they told me, well, we can't help it if she's out sick that day. And I was like, well, I don't want her to be counted as an absent because, that's going to go against her when it's not required for her to take this test. And lo and behold, she went to school that day and she was placed in a different classroom while the rest of her class went to the computer lab and sat and took the PARCC test. So I would fight tooth and nail and tell them that your child will be going to school that day and you refuse to allow them to participate in the PARCC test. That's my take on it.
Well, the Common Core Forum website actually has a form for opting out of the PARCC test that people can use.
Does it?
Yes.
It does. Yeah.
Yep, it's a
Yeah.
PDF file, I'm just looking at it.
And I think
now.
on that website as well, it lists the memo, I don't know for sure, but I know that I can dig it up if anybody wants to contact me. But the memo that Chester sent out, kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth, saying, you can't, your child has to take it, but if they don't take it, then they can go do some other academic activity that day. So that's my understanding of it.
Summer, was she the only one? Was she with her group of kids?
She was not the only one, actually. It was her and one other child in her classroom, but since then, I mean, we chose to go for MCAS next year anyway, but we had, I'd say, 30, 40 parents at our last school committee meeting that were pretty upset about all of this. And I think that after hosting the forum in our town and having other parents come forward, and Linda, who's sitting behind you, hosted something similar for parents to come and vent at the Halifax Police Department. There's been a general, discomfort over the whole thing. And I think if it happened this year that we picked Park, it wouldn't just be my daughter and her friend that opted out of it, but that's hypothetical.
Go ahead. To add to that, just had a couple comments and then I had a question for Jamie. Our politicians aren't fully aware of this issue, and I'm happy to see one here. Thank you for coming. I had a meet and greet. I met Representative Coulter and I met Senator Kennedy, and I was just surprised at some of the things they didn't know. And we have to reach out, and you've got to get in their ear, and if they hear enough of it, they're going to start paying attention. Right now, there's just a couple of squabbles, and they think they're crazy people, and they dismiss it. So you got to get educated, and you've got to speak up. My own superintendent, I went to, again, school committee meetings, and luckily we have 2 anti-Common Core school committee people on our school committee. But our own superintendent didn't know some basic things about Common Core, which I said to him, do you know that Common Core is copywritten? He said, no, I did not. And on and on. So that's a big issue too that I don't know if was mentioned tonight. It's copywritten, it's private. And I know Jamie did say about how, you can't change it, but it's copywritten. And our superintendent didn't know about this. Even with having 2 school committee people who are against it, our chairperson basically said to us, and you could tell they were getting a little nervous, so I suggest you go to school committee meetings in force and make them nervous and speak up, because our chairperson basically said, we're kind of worried about getting money. It was all about the money. It wasn't about whether it was right or wrong to do these tests. It was about the fear of the money. And I read another article, I don't know if it was Sandra Stowski recently, talking about how that's not a good threat. Like, so here we are, our school, our teachers, our administrators, who are trying to do the right thing for our kids. And I'm sure Whitman Hanson is like Halifax. There's a lot of great teachers there. And then you get the administrators, and they're getting pushed from the higher ups. They're getting pushed from the people with billions of dollars, and it's coming down in misinformation. If you search anything online that's positive Common Core, if you research, you usually find the money going back to Bill Gates, the Fordham Institute, all the people that are saying, it's good, mostly comes from the people who are going to make money. Pearson Company is one of the biggest, going to make the biggest money. They're going to make billions of dollars because they make the books and they're going to do the tests. So they're going to make a lot of money. They don't want our kids to succeed, because what does the kid have to do? They have to take the test again. More money for somebody else. So this is way above here, and I feel like, and I know like the other people that I talk to that are starting to get riled up, the soccer moms that you talk about getting ticked off, because we feel so like alone, but it's growing, and I encourage you all, there's Facebook pages. Summer has one, Southeastern Parents Against Common Core, Stop Common Core Massachusetts, Parents Uneducated Against Common Core Standards, the Common Core Forum. There's a ton of, they're sharing articles every day, and get as knowledgeable as you can about it, and talk your ear off. The great thing about it too is it's Democrats and Republicans. It's not either side. It's really, I feel like it's billionaires against us, the 99% of us who have to deal with this. I read a letter to the editor, and it got published in the Patriot Ledger, so I encourage you to write your letters to the editor. But again, you can't just, I was kind of disappointed to hear some of the things that, I'm sorry, that Kevin said, he sounded like he was just kind of accepting it and making the best of it. And I don't want to just make the best of something that is handed down from where it's coming from. And, you know, and maybe you didn't mean it that way, but it just seemed like you were trying to make the best of what they were giving you. And I say, let's not accept that. And let's speak up as much as we can. And people say, well, speak to, and I contacted Coulter and Kennedy and asked them to speak with them because they were very polite and very sweet. Oh, I'd like to get in touch with you and talk to you again. So I emailed them. I haven't heard back, but I'm going to email them again and again and again. And I encourage you all to do the same thing. And don't be, you know, just because you're just a mom or just a dad, you got to speak out because it spreads. And then all of a sudden, our voices are heard. So, everyone, thank you.
This is from my viewpoint, and I appreciate everything that you're saying. And I came in here with a very open mind to try and hear every side. And I'm hearing things that are very concerning to me as a school committee member. I don't want to think about it's all about the money, because it should be all about the education. That's where it should be.
I think people are afraid.
But I feel the frustration, and Jeff will tell you, I'm not afraid to write a letter. Or email, etc. And what I really feel as a school committee member, we need the public, the parents. This is where I feel it needs to come from. If you're unhappy about your child's education, me sitting in a school committee meeting, I can't really dictate or do anything. We control policies, there are things that we can control, but the curriculum and what is taught, that ends up getting to a state level, and I know Jeff will do everything in the world he can, you know, obviously hearing his positions, right to the state levels, go to the federal level even. You know, that's where the push needs to go. You know, get up at them, get in their faces.
And I forgot to
if you
ask
could.
Jamie my question. You talked about the lawyers with the 3 laws that basically saying the Fed's got to stay out of our education. Forgive my ignorance, but why isn't somebody suing? Why isn't this? If we're breaking 3 laws.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, so we're a pretty small think tank. We're like 8 or 9 people, right? And we're really pleased with the quality of the legal brief that we had prepared for us, or that the researchers developed for us. But we generally don't litigate, you know, and so the same kinds of lawyers that we identified to do the research are not necessarily the same ones that would sue. And so I'm not an attorney, but what you need to do is you need to find someone with standing. That means parents, it could be a school committee, it could be an aggrieved interest, basically. That's what you have to come up with. And the thing that's been interesting about it, you mentioned the moms, you're just moms, but you know, whether it's 500 or 600 people that, you know, were in an auditorium in Salt Lake City, it was really 3 moms. There were 2 moms in Indianapolis that got them out of, got Indiana out of Common Core. There was really 1 or 2 moms in Oklahoma that got them to repeal it. It is one of the things that's been remarkable about it, and I think it relates to the lawsuit too, because the truth of it is that parents are probably the ones with the best standing on this. Is that it has been driven by individual citizens. There is not some, you know, coordinating. Well, I mean, he would probably know better than I would, but you would, I mean, look, the U.S. Department of Education has directly funded the PARCC testing, right? That's a violation of federal law. They're not supposed to do that. So you can sue the feds for illegally funding it. You can probably sue the, you know, PARCC for accepting federal money from, you know, an entity that wasn't supposed to give them and have a grant application. I mean, lawyers are fairly creative about these things, I think, but I'm not one of them, but he may have some ideas on the best course.
I'm not necessarily against lawsuits, but I will say, having worked on a ballot question, that's very difficult. You know, if you're to try to take it to the ballot question level, that'd be difficult. Because what you're going to find is whether it's a lawsuit or a ballot question, for example, you're going to be up against quite a bit of money, a lot of special interests that will want to keep things in place. I think my suggestion is, and it's not because I'm serving the legislature, but I do see results when activists at the State House take up certain issues, what you should look for, real quick. We get, the new session gets sworn in January 8th, I believe. And what we'll have is about 2 weeks window of time to file new bills for the next 2 years. You file all your bills within a 2-week window, and you have another week or two's window to review the 5,000 or 6,000 bills that were filed and see if you want to co-sponsor them. It's one of the, as I just heard in the crowd, ridiculous type of situations, but that's the way it is. You can late file bills, but unfortunately they can be rejected out of hand, and quite often are. So the real thing to do is mahouse.gov, masshouse.gov. Okay, that's the website where you can find all the legislation that will be filed in the next session. One second. And what you want to do is use keyword searches, Common Core, education, things like that. And I would say that I'm guessing that Pioneer Institute will also be very on top of anything filed related to Common Core. There's one little thing, sort of an etiquette. You don't step on the toes of other legislators that are working on certain issues. Keiko Oral of Lakeville has put the legislation in several different bills in the last session on Common Core and putting a pause on PARCC, things like that. I'm guessing that she will continue to be the lead filer on those. So you may want to specifically look up Keiko Oral in the next session in January or February when the House Clerk gets those filed and online. You will then be able to look at those. You can call the House Clerk. You can stop up at the House Clerk. Okay, go ahead.
It's my understanding that the bill that she filed got tabled. Can you explain what that means?
So, I mean, if they don't want it to happen, they're just going to vote to have it go to study, which is basically throw it in the garbage can over there and refile it next year, and we'll see if we change our minds, which is unlikely. Okay, that's the reality, but the truth is, it's the activists behind it, just like Jamie was saying. One or two people that actually take the issue to the Hill, actually speak at the hearings on these bills, actually start to make the people change their minds. People telling their legislator they want them to vote in favor of a repeal or a modification of Common Core will start changing the minds. If you create enough noise in your district, up at the State House, it will happen. You just have to be organized and effective, and I think Pioneer Institute, again, can be a clearinghouse for information on that. And I know that you certainly are getting organized very well already. We've got a governor that I think is already predisposed to think in line with what we're thinking. I think it's just a matter of now convincing the legislature to act accordingly. And it's your job to keep your legislators responsible. And by the way, I know you raised your hand for a question as well. Why don't you run for office? You with the glasses. I ran on one issue. Make government accountable to the people that live in our cities and towns. And everything relates from there, from education to gas taxes to everything. It all falls from there. If you believe in what you believe, you can be a strong voice up at the legislature as well. Or if you have a friend that you think would do a good job, recommend that they run for office. And even if they don't win, at least during the campaign, you have debates and bring the issue to the fore and keep your legislator accountable when they go back to the State House on that issue.
So you start January 8th, you said, when, if I bring a bunch of people with picket signs, when will we get the most attention and when we get the most people?
Well, the good news is, a little bit of the behind the scenes. So the bills are filed in January. They are co-sponsored by fellow legislators in the House and Senate for another 2 weeks. So usually January is sort of a crazy flurry of activity. Lobbyists are constantly trying to see if they can get people to co-sponsor and things like that. It's a time when I think you should also again look up those bills and see if you can get your legislator to co-sponsor those bills. So don't get your pickets, don't get your wooden sticks ready yet. Okay, that's the phone calls, is to get the legislators on board with certain legislation. Then the clerk has to sort those bills to go to the relevant committee. So they will look at the bill, determine what committee it should go to. Revenue, whether it should go to judiciary, whether it should go to education. There's a lot of different aspects to bills that they have to determine where it should go first. And some bills may actually have to go to multiple. And then most bills ultimately work their way from whatever committee out and go to Ways and Means because most have a fiscal impact. Now I'm on the Ways and Means committee. That was my choice when I first got there. Luckily I got my first choice. I wanted education and Ways and Means. Both were so large that I ultimately chose Ways and Means because everything filters through there. And so, I get eyes on anything that's gonna pass or is being brought to the House for a vote. but anyway, any fiscal impact will go to Ways and Means as well. And so the bill will travel throughout the session into multiple committees and then theoretically make it to the House, then Senate, and if it passes in both, of course, go to the governor. Actually, to a conference committee to work out any differences. From conference goes back to House and Senate for ratification of that, and then ultimately to the governor for a signature, whether he chooses to amend or veto. Then the House and Senate would either, override the amendments or vetoes, and ultimately it would be signed at some capacity or rejected completely. And so that's, that's Schoolhouse Rock. You can watch that video about that. So I'm just a bill. That's pretty accurate. But what happens, in reality, is that it is the Speaker, Senate President, and Governor have, consolidated power so well in this state that it usually becomes a trio of people that ultimately decide whether something lives or dies. And your committee chairs do have a relevant voice on whether things have merit. But something as controversial as Common Core and PARCC testing is certainly going to be something that is going to take major activist involvement. And again, it's good that you have the MTA now in your corner. That's not always the case in education, as far as being on the parents' side. In my opinion, I hate to say that, but sometimes the reality. And then you've got that power. Again, going back to what Jamie said, a couple of you go up and testify just from our district, and you get a couple people from every district. There's a lot of districts out there. You basically force them to spend an entire day defending why they're keeping PARCC. You're going to make these legislators look really bad, okay? And they're going to have a tough time defending a vote. So that's what I would say is and so just, those hearings, then once it's sorted by the clerk, goes to committees, then the committee starts scheduling hearings. And so that is when you start, unfortunately, then what they do is they do these hearings in, let's say, the summer, spring, summertime. Summer's good, just let me tell you, like, for example, the gas tax index, and that got passed in July, in the middle, when everybody's on vacation. They try to take a lot of the controversial stuff and stick it at times where we're not really around all that much. So there's a game certainly played up there. But there are no official notifications that have to tell you when the hearings are. And, again, there are official notifications that have to go out with a certain time frame of telling you when those hearings will be.
Can we get that on mass?
So the masshouse.gov should tell you, or the clerk's office. I would write down some of these numbers. I don't have it with me, but look it up. And the House clerk, they have to basically provide journals. Not only do they record the bills, sort them to committee, they also keep a regular daily journal of the sessions and the House calendar. And so there are. It's not easy to access, but luckily it is online. You can find this out. Obviously, contact me. I have an aide that can look these things up for you. Your local rep or state senator has an aide that can help find these dates for you. And what we'll do is, like we did last year, we had a rally at the State House, and we can do it again. Have another rally on the day of hearings. That'd be the best, because if everybody's up there and can testify and come outside and have a big rally, you're going to attract some TV cameras, and you're going to, again, force the legislators' hands to make decisions. Okay, and not just pass it off to the committee chair or the power trio. So that's sort of inside baseball.
Just a little bit about that, more on the House committees. If it ends up there, how does it end up? Does it automatically get a hearing or a request, or does it have to go through, or could it just be tabled and you never hear about it again? I guess and is it proper for, even though committee member A, B, C aren't from our district, we can still call them, correct?
Yes, okay, so first question was kind of, do they have to have a hearing on it? Yes, if it's a timely file, if it's filed within the first 2 weeks of, or the 2-week window that we're given as once we're sworn in, and then the 2 weeks following, if it's timely filed, it has to be given a hearing. Okay, so there's that. Yes, committee members of any committee, feel free to contact them on that issue. They don't have to be your rep or senator to be contacted if they're specifically working on that issue. I would also ask them to be in attendance on the day of the hearings for that. They don't have to necessarily be there. I would ask them to be in attendance, and I would actually try to see if you can go yourself or have some designate go and keep track of the votes. Committees, we have a rules debate at the beginning of each session, and we've always tried to make committee votes available online. Right. And they continue to reject that. Sure. We should have much more transparency, and I think it's not right to have committee votes not posted so that the public knows how their legislator voted.
Is that committee vote rule one that's House-wide, or is it by committee?
House-wide. House and Senate usually adopt. Yeah. So not posted.
Good point. House and Senate, are there two sets of hearings, or is it just one that's joint?
Usually joint.
Joint.
Jeff, will they piggyback those House bills? Will they?
Maybe not.
That
Depends.
way, if you vote for this, you don't get that.
They might split them up during hearings so that they don't get the same volume of people on the same day. So, and if it ever came to a vote, they can combine bills into one sort of consolidated bill for vote as well. If it ever got to a vote, that'd be wonderful. I mean, that's when you want to get you want it to get to the House for a vote, so you have a record. That is public record when people take a vote in the House and Senate.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I should actually say this. I apologize. I'm overdue to get home with some food for the kids. If anybody has any questions, if they've missed anything from me, I'm just up the road. Drop a note in my wife's studio next door. But email me, jeffdeal.com, jeff@jeffdeal.com, and happy to talk further. But these guys really, on Common Core and PARCC, are the experts. I'm not saying I don't know and I'm aware of the situation, but they are really, truly the people you need to go to get in the weeds on this thing, because they know it inside and out and are making the legislature very accountable. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks for coming, Jeff.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kim.
I have a question. Has homeschooling increased since Common Core's come around, and how's that going to affect the local level in the school districts if all of the upset parents with younger kids decide to homeschool?
So the short answer to your question is that yes, there has been a couple states where, and there's an article just I think in the last week or two about, I think it's North Carolina and a handful of other states, where there has been a 14% increase in homeschooling. The thing, not to pile on about how bad this is, but of course the guy David Coleman, who was the chief architect of Common Core, just a year or two ago was appointed the head of the College Board. So the College Board sets the SAT and they set the advanced placement testing, and he has made clear that he's going to align both the AP testing and the SAT to the Common Core. So the concern is that those are tests that would apply to homeschoolers, private school kids, Catholic school kids, etc. And so that creates a bigger problem here. But it's why getting engaged with your state and federal officials on it is really important, because at some point when you have people that are paying for the development of standards, and then as they have in Massachusetts, they paid for a variety of organizations to positively evaluate those standards, and the Commissioner of Education used that as the basis for his decision to adopt. And you have the Gates Foundation has given a lot of money to the College Board, and the architect of Common Core now heads it. I mean, at some point, these are kind of monopolistic relationships, right? And we have laws against that. There are antitrust laws, and there are laws against monopolistic behavior and cartels. And so you've touched on a very important piece of it, because the truth of it is that in many of the places we've been to across the country, I'd say about a third of the audience are homeschoolers, because they left the public system because of their concerns about having to comply with even state standards that they didn't like, or a curriculum that's out of alignment with their religious convictions or what have you. And I think they're concerned that even as homeschoolers, that some of these things step on their rights as parents. And but the good news is the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund has been one of the folks that have been most active on it. They did a video, I can't remember, I think got several 100,000 views all over the country, called Building the Machine, and it was all about Common Core and PARCC and all these kind of conflicts of interest. But it's interesting. You ask a question about homeschoolers, and it has enormous implications. I hope that's helpful.
I do. I have a second question. I was reading an article online talking about the private money in your 1% and your billionaires. And it's a rumor, and it's an online article of whether it's true, false, or where it stands, to see how much George Soros has to do with Common Core and working with Bill Gates. Does this article directly link to it? It linked to the PARCC testing of Common Core. If anyone's ever read any of documentaries, we know what he's about, and it's not good.
So I've spent 5 years looking at Common Core and doing all this key research on it. I've never seen any evidence of that. The one that is really most obvious, and it's not, sometimes you hear people saying it sounds conspiratorial. None of this is a conspiracy. You can go to the Bill and Melinda Gates website. They have a little box up in the corner. It says search. You can put in the Governors Association. You can put in Jeb Bush's organization called Foundation for Educational Excellence. Governors, chief state school officers, Achieve. It all just pops right up. This is not, they haven't been very public about what they're doing, but it's not a conspiracy theory. There's no sort of, puppeteer here, other than, deep-pocketed foundation that has, I think some people would say they have a financial self-interest in some of this. Is Bill Gates doing it for the money? I don't think he is. I think he thinks that this is the fix. This is the way you fix public education, is national standards, testing, and curriculum. And I just think he's wrong. And I think actually one of the most immediate examples of how he's wrong is the country just to the north, Canada. We probably have more in common with Canada than any other country in the world. They don't have a Canadian Department of Education. All of the decisions are made by their provinces, which is the equivalent of our states. It's a very, very localized, decentralized system, and they are higher performing than we are. So it doesn't follow that if you have national standards or testing or curriculum that you're immediately going to become a real high-performing state. And what we know from Massachusetts is that when you have state legislators and local officials that own the work and control the work, that you can make remarkable progress. But I guess it's not even like an ideological view. I just don't think the feds are good at this. They're good at fighting wars and foreign policy and some other things, but this they're not good at. And the same is true with a lot of the other private interests around it. There's an enormous number of conflicts of interest. These people don't have good records. They just, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been watching Achieve Inc., and I was amazed that they got the PARCC contract because they've actually never done testing before. So, it's things like that. You say, wow, something's wrong here.
You said that on the federal and state levels that you need, is it a good idea also on the local level to bring the subject up as I've suggested, or I just want to make sure that I'm not wasting people's time?
No, I think it's enormously important. I think the thing about it is that while the adoption of the state standards, the Common Core through the Board of Education is out of the control of the school committee, the curriculum that's set in the schools, that is the decision of the school committee, and the school committee can say we're not. There's a handful of school committees across the Commonwealth that have not. They said they're not doing PARCC. Not doing Common Core, and there's a 50-50 said they're not doing PARCC. And I think the thing that's important to keep in mind is, and you're probably seeing it in small ways, is that whether it's your Board of Selectmen or your municipal government, they're the ones who approve the budget for the school department, right? And so if there are unfunded mandates or additional technology costs or buying lots of iPads for PARCC or what have you, that's a function of local government. And so I think bringing it up, again, Republican, Democrat, local official, federal official, this has broad implications. So I think it's, and public officials, because it has to do with our children and it's public money, they should be able to explain to you what they're doing.
That and it brings attention to the issue.
Right.
Has there been an ethics complaint filed against Chester formally?
That's a good point. So in 2010, Channel 5 did a story on Mitch Chester. If you send me an email, I can send you the PDF of it because I'm not sure it's online anymore. But what they did, it was interesting, the Channel 5 was looking at travel, the travel budgets for various state agencies. And very quickly, the Mass Department of Ed came up to number one. And so they began to peel back the layers, and it turned out that the person who was doing the most traveling was Mitch Chester, the Commissioner of Education. And they began to look at who was paying for his travel. And this is prior to Massachusetts adopting. We adopted in the summer of 2010. Channel 5 was looking at who was paying for his travel and where he was going prior to the adoption. So even before we adopted the standards in Massachusetts, Achieving, the Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, was flying Mitch Chester around the country trying to get other boards of education and other commissioners to adopt. You know, I know public officials aren't supposed to take any more than, I think, like $50 or something like that, and that seems to me a violation of you know, ethics laws, not to mention the fact that you know, all of these arrangements, I mean, some states, Louisiana in particular, and New Mexico have made a big deal out of the fact that a lot of the bidding for these contracts for PARCC, for example, have not been, you know, I mean, it's basically a no-bid contract. There's one option here, you know, it's PARCC, right? And so, you know, that there are a lot of issues about procurement too. So, I mean, I like to say that in relation to Common Core and PARCC, the conflicts of interest have conflicts of interest. I mean, some of the moms have done a remarkable job of tracing out.
Has anyone written to the Mass State Ethics Commission and said, I believe there is a violation here? They have a duty to investigate.
It's a good question. I don't know.
I would like to, I'm not asking a question, but just to let people know, at the Hanson Middle School, there was an article that we're trying to raise money for Chromebooks. They're not in any way, shape, or relationship to the Common Core or PARCC, okay? I just want to make that clear. Thank you.
One of the missing links that we haven't spoke about tonight, which I'm thankful that you had this meeting, I'm not from Whitman or Hanson, but I had seen this on Facebook and I'm very interested, as well as Anne Marie. And the missing part we haven't mentioned are the teachers. I'm wondering, has anybody had any success sort of reaching out to the teachers and letting them know, one, that you support them, or what we can do for them, aside from speaking out to our selectmen and school committee?
I've spoken to a couple of teachers and I've gotten different responses. One response I got was, there's no problem with the curriculum. It's great. My students seem to love it. But the impression I got from this teacher was all they know about it is what they're getting fed from about the curriculum. They don't know any of the stuff we talked about today, you know, any of the big picture stuff. And I say that because the second teacher I spoke to gave me that same answer and then followed up and said, that's how I felt before I went to your forum. Then I went to your forum and I heard Dr. Stotsky speak and I heard Jamie Gaff speak and other people speak, and I realized that it's much bigger than just what I'm seeing in the classroom. And so she started digging and realized that it's more than what they're being told. And I don't want to speak for teachers, but I feel like there's a fear of them to speak out against it. And their jobs are on the line, and they don't want to rock the boat, I guess. And like I said, I don't want to speak for them, but just based on what I've been told from teachers is this teacher flat out told me that there's a fear to speak out. So my idea, and I don't know whether it's going to fly, was to create an anonymous survey for my school system and see if they'll fill it out. And whether that means they have somebody else handwrite it or they type it out and print it and put it in a blank envelope and send it to the school committee. I don't know, I haven't worked out the kinks yet, but I want to know how they feel about it because they're not being given the venue to speak about it. And so if anybody has any ideas on how to do that, that'd be great, but this is the only one.
Survey monkey back to your school committee. Or actually, I like the note, I thought there was this gentleman in the red shirt.
So you say that you go to your board of selectmen, place an article as a no conference. Either you're for it or against PARCC, which is it? Put it out there for the people to vote. That'll send a message to the school committees, to the state reps. It should.
Oh, absolutely, but I think the teachers aren't being asked how they feel about it.
Well, right.
Teachers
But this is
themselves.
the way
Can the
that
Massachusetts Teacher Association do that?
Yeah, the MTA, yeah.
If the head of it's against it, maybe she could be convinced to do an anonymous survey.
I think the only way
That would be phenomenal, I think, actually.
On that issue about finding out how people feel about it, I'm a selectman in Whitman, also school committee in South Riverside. You would have to do a non-binding question on the town election, explaining the pros and cons of the issue, and are you for or against. That way the voters have a chance to weigh in on it. To have it at town meeting for, you know, you have 150, 200 people at a town meeting, they shouldn't be speaking for 9,000 people. But if you do a non-binding question on the ballot.
The key to that too is being anonymous.
Right.
Because
Yeah, it
it's
would
an
be
anonymous
anonymous.
vote as opposed to town meeting floor where people are intimidated by a yes or no vote. Makes a big difference.
That's what Australian bill.
Well, some of the teachers aren't always living in town, they're teaching.
That's
Yeah.
true, that's a good point.
But you also get to know how parents feel about it.
To your point, I think both really is what you're saying.
I think that symbolic gestures can be underrated a lot. I think people are worried that, you know, if you have this vote, it doesn't mean anything. But there's a lot of arrogance about this whole thing, where no recognition that the ultimate consumers are children and the parents. You know, nothing is done to persuade parents that what kids are being taught is what they should be being taught. It comes from authority. Well, everybody who's anybody says this is a good idea, so, you know, and you're entitled to have an opinion about this stuff. And I do think that being at school committee meetings, especially because at our meetings, there's hardly anybody there except the people who are involved in the operations of the school. So a parent with an opinion would stick out, you know, very prominently in that meeting. And those sorts of small venues where parents can show up and say, you know, what they think are important. So I would encourage that kind of thing.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm curious. I know that there was discussion, obviously, when you voted to accept the PARCC testing. Has there been any discussion at the school committee since then about Common Core?
There was a discussion about this meeting last month. So, and that discussion was basically an overview was provided of how the current frameworks in Massachusetts were adopted. And it was very limited, though, in terms of the scope of the discussion. It wasn't really, are you for or against this? It was informational. This is how it came about. It was just more, how does it impact the school itself, and what are we doing? You know, not really the bigger picture is, you know, do we like this? Do we not like it? What's good about it? What's not? That was not, we did discuss that when we voted to adopt PARCC for a year, to do the provisional, you know, PARCC exam. Should we do PARCC, shouldn't we? But in terms of, you know, do we like the Common Core, do we not like it? Not really.
I was at the last school committee meeting, and what I thought was very impressive at that meeting, speaking about this, was the increase in what I call profiling and data mining. There were lots of different views on that, but from how we went from implementing Common Core and PARCC and the changes to the national standards, from taking 6 elements that we report to the government to what was told to us is now 52. And I thought that was a huge increase. And that's just the beginning of what's to come when it comes to privacy. I thought that was very impressive. And I applaud the Whitman Hanson School District for actually being honest about that, because there's other school districts that are kind of shoveling that under the rug, like Bob and Summer had both said, and the parents here. Halifax hiding that. They don't want their parents to know. So I really applaud you guys on that. Thank you. And you guys' next meeting's December 10th for the parents that are going to be here. They didn't need me when I went. Thank you. It was very pleasant. Please go. They will hear you at the end. And it was really informative. I'm glad I went.
There are 52 elements that was disclosed by our Director of Technology. I did a little bit of research. The one piece that I don't have is when a child takes PARCC, what information is being given for the PARCC test. The information that the state gathers, and this is just me and my take in looking at the data, it's reasonable. They do want a child's name, they do want a date of birth, they do want an address. They do ask, and they do see if the child is on a low-income program. They don't do a financial profile. I'm blown away that Massasoit would have that information. That's such an invasion of privacy that just blows my mind, so to speak, that they could have that. It's incredible. That's, you know, and there's too much information out there on everybody. But of those 52 pieces, there's maybe 10 relevant things, and then there's, just not used. And I've got the whole list. You know, and a lot of the items aren't used. A lot of them would be what you would consider to be, you know, quote unquote reasonable. You know, like days in attendance. You know, how many days a student there, how long they've been in the district. Program code, Title I school choice participation, member of a military family, number 30, discontinued, career vocational technical education. You know, so when they say 52 elements, it's not 52 exact pieces, but there is information they collect. And we would hope and pray that our state does safeguard that information to a very stringent standard and not share it. Now, that's the other piece that I have my concern with when you start looking at who they share it with. When they share it for a study. And they do go on to have a caveat that it's being limited into only that study, etc. But what are they doing to vet that company, for lack of a better word, or Brown University, as to who's seeing that data, how it's being protected, and what they're ultimately going to do with it? That, I think, needs to be a very clear policy. And you have to understand, is it relevant to share it? I can see the need for a study so that we can improve ourselves, but at the same time, why can't that be random, and why can't they remove any personal information?
No, I understand, and I understand the need for the information you listed on the local level, not to be shared with the state, and definitely not the federal government. You know, I agree on the local level, so how do we...
Well, locally, we don't share anything with the federal government.
No, but it goes to
It goes to the state, and
which then, yeah.
You know, I think Bob's presentation was an excellent presentation. You raised an enormous number of really good questions. I would also encourage you, there's a woman named Jane Robbins. She worked on this paper for us called Cogs in the Machine. But if you do a Google search for Jane Robbins and data collection, and you look at YouTube, I can't remember how many views there's been on it. She did a really good job in 10 or 15 minutes of describing all of the, I think there are 400 data points that they need to collect under this longitudinal data system is what they call it. And so I would encourage you to take a look at those. But the final thing is that a lot of this stuff was not gathered under the previous Massachusetts standards and the previous MCAS. I mean, the truth is we know that they need, you know, teachers and principals need about 10 pieces of academic data, not all this other personally identifiable, your home, your address, any of this other stuff. Academic data. The purpose of schools is schooling. It's not to fix society. And having the 400 pieces of data points on where parents live and all this other stuff is really, it's inappropriate. And it's out of the mission of what schools are supposed to be doing. And there's no evidence that collecting the 400 pieces of data is going to help Johnny or Susie do any better in terms of their reading or math. And I guess that's, you're exactly right. It's not relevant. It's not relevant to improving student achievement.
Jamie, where can we find information about these remaining 400 pieces of data? I'm trying to find them. Because I know the district was 52. I knew there's another 300.
It's in that paper, the Cogs in the Machine. If you do a Google search for Cogs in the Machine, Pioneer Institute, you can go to our website. It's a pretty lengthy paper, and it's not just the Halloween was just, a month or so ago. It's creepy. I mean, any parent who reads this paper, and it's a very dispassionate view of what it is that they want to collect. As I told my boss when we commissioned it, I said, I wish we didn't have to write a paper like this. It's not really the run-of-the-mill paper that we tend to do at Pioneer. We do kind of enrollment data, Common Core, folk tech schools, how they're performing. But because they brushed aside these FERPA laws that Summer talked about, and because of the intrusiveness of it, I said, we got to do a paper on this. And it's gotten a ton of downloads because in a lot of the forums across the country, it may be the #1 issue that moms go and talk with, the Jane Robbins after the thing is over. When she's up there, all the moms go right to her because they really find what she has to say the most alarming. And that's why I'd say the best place to look is, that video that she did.
Shortcutting reading the paper, which I will download, I promise. How are they getting the 400 points of information if we're supplying 52?
They're getting it from the State Department of Education here in Massachusetts, and they are committed. The PARCC testing will be gathering it. So not all of it's
So
yet.
they're not getting it yet.
They're not getting it yet.
Okay.
But the design really is to, they used to call it interagency networking back in the 90s. PARCC, they're gonna. It's through PARCC, and any of this, any of the information. I don't know that it's true, but I've heard in different parts of the country that the pilot of the PARCC test will have a bunch of academic questions, and then as a break for the kids, they'll have some questions about the kind of mail that they get at home and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're gonna know.
Jamie, could I just
write junk.
Right.
So, I don't know if you have a specific or recommended course of action, for people who want to see this stuff change. My take, based on what I've heard tonight, is that, like, the first step is we get out of PARCC. Right. So in terms of what are our priorities here, get out of PARCC. That's one. Okay, and then it's harder to get my head around what to do about the Common Core. Broadly, would you say that the Massachusetts frameworks be designed in the best interest of Massachusetts students and not with the respect to being common to the rest of the country? Would that be?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
characterization?
Getting out of PARCC is very doable. The governor-elect could do that unilaterally. Could do that through an executive order, and we haven't officially adopted PARCC. It's being piloted in Massachusetts. We haven't adopted yet. That is easily fixable. How to undo Common Core once that happens. Once you disconnect it to the test, and you start having a lot more control over your own. You're going to control your own test, and then you can start to talk about revisions to the standards. My own view is, given the success that we've had on the previous standards, we've got to revert back to the other standards pre-2010. But that's hard to do because the Board of Ed is really controlled at this point by people that are pro-Common Core. So I think, but you're right. Get rid of PARCC first, then begin to figure out how to revise it. And that's why I said, the way to augment it for the time being is things like this, again, this kids version, adopted versions of like Huckleberry Finn or Moby Dick or Secret Garden or Black Beauty. Whatever these books are, these kind of pieces of classic literature, you can, on your own, independent from your schools, you can augment the kind of stories and the kind of poetry and reading that they get. And then the other one, I just mentioned Kumon, and again, it's not because we have any financial stake in it, it's just I'm trying to tell you what my wife and I have done.
Yeah, that fits actually. My third grader doesn't have written homework. Her homework every night is to read. Keep a reading log, read for, she does it at least half an hour a night. So that fits perfectly with what you're saying. Pick something that's actually good to read when you have your kid doing the reading. So.
Yeah, and that's what the previous standards really did. Some of this is, you would want to do this anyway to have your kids succeed, but even under the previous standards. But the quality of the reading, it matters enormously. And if the kids are not reading, you can read it to them, right? And it just matters. The evidence is becoming clearer and clearer from the success the state's had over the last 10, 15 years, is that it matters enormously. Common Core is weaker on this, but the way to remedy it, aside from the school and what the school's doing, it is to take a very active role in educating your kids in things that are likely to succeed.
Just in Halifax, we voted to do MCAS again, but my kids' books are all Common Core. And so that's the frustrating thing from us. Like, we're trying to do, just reading with my son about Ecuador, we're trying to do that stuff too, but it's frustrating when the books are already going that way. It's like they're putting all their money down and they're expecting it to go through. We're putting all this money in, and that's why we showed up to our school committee meeting. They're supposed to talk about curriculum. And we're like, whoa, Common Core. And they're like, where were you 2 years ago? I didn't get the memo that we were doing this, so it's been very hush-hush. And just real quick about the data thing, my son is on an IEP, and he's in the lunch bunch social thing, and the teacher said, I'm asking permission to do a test. I said, is it Common Core aligned? And he had no idea what I was talking about. And I said, I really can't allow a test that I don't see. Well, he sent me the test. He wasn't supposed to, I'm sure. And I took a picture of it. And some of the things, are you afraid of a lot of things? I often feel sick. I swear I use bad words. I lie to others. I feel lonely. Like all these things. And now he said, right. Well, and this is to help the school counselor. But the school counselor said, like, oh, we're not going to fill the names out. It's going to be anonymous. I'm like, how is that going to help my child? I will tell you if my child throws things when he's angry, and then we'll work on it. But they just want to see, and there's a place for the name. So I know maybe this year it's anonymous, but next year they're going to just give that out, and they're not going to ask you. You're just going to be filling it out. And there was someone at our meeting had said something about one of the assignments was to go into their medicine cabinet and write down all the medications that are in their house and what it's used for. And the whole idea was to show how, don't leave drugs around, blah, blah, blah. Why would that be? 7th grade? Do you remember that?
I don't remember what grade it was.
But that wasn't you?
Yeah.
But so that's the other things that you've got to be aware of too. Go ahead.
I think that's just, and pardon me for saying it this way, the stupidity of a teacher. I can't see how that could be Common Core, but it is so wrong to be doing that anyways.
But it's from Pearson, who is aligned with Common Core, and it's coming. It's coming from
That
somewhere
question
else.
here was
And he
right
goes,
from Pearson?
Oh, okay. Yes, I can show you a picture of it if you like. I'm not supposed to have it. I'll probably get arrested.
Post it.
I'd like to thank
Email it to
everybody
me. I'll be
for
glad
coming
to.
tonight. If anyone has any further questions for any of us, come talk to us. We have emails, so forth. Facebook, join Facebook groups, talk to soccer moms, your friends, your whatever. Soccer dads,
The big
coaches.
question about what to do is don't let it be a vacuum. You need to be involved.
Yeah, you
Period.
have to. You have to
This
be
is not
involved.
the
You
end.
have
This
to
is
be
just
vocal.
barely the beginning.
And thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.